What's going on, everybody? You're listening to the Point2Point NHL Recap Show, Season 2, Episode 14. I'm Pascal Pryor, joined by Mark Haverlack, and today we got a pretty fun episode on our hands here with trade deadline rolling up, and we got the Four Nations tournament coming up before that, so we might start seeing a lot more trades coming up here in the next few weeks. Basically, today we're going to go through every team in the NHL, and me and Mark are going to give one player each that we think is most likely to get dealt from that team. Before we get into all of that, though, Mark, how are you doing, dude?
Dude, not too bad. Obviously, I probably sound like a broken drum the last couple of weeks talking about the Habs, but man, it's exciting to watch them still playing at a pretty good level, battling for that last playoff spot. Lots of time left, but probably one of the most entertaining games of the season last night against the Rangers. Ended up getting the 5-4 OT win. Rangers were 1 point behind them heading to that game too, man. So it was a really important game. Both teams coming off a back-to-back, but really solid effort and just excited moving forward, dude, heading into this Four Nations break.
Yeah, you guys are. We were talking about this for probably 15 minutes before we even started recording, but it's official. You guys might be the most exciting team to watch right now in the NHL out of like the up-and-coming teams. I'm down to get right into this because, hey, there's a lot of teams, a lot of players we're going to be going through here and sort of talking about. Let's start off in the East and work from the bottom of the standings to the top. Bottom, you have Buffalo Sabres. They're out of it. For me, I got Bowen Byram as their number one sort of trade bait. He's 23 years old. He's got 1 year left, making just below $4 million. And he's an RFA at the end of the season, right? So it's like if Buffalo was to keep him, they'd sort of have to give him not an 8 year contract, but I think they would more need to give him like a 4 to 6 year contract. So it's like Buffalo would have to really sort of lock him up here, and I don't know if he sort of fits in their plans just with how many left defensemen they have on their team. Who do you have, though, Mark, for the Buffalo Sabres?
That's an interesting pick. That's one guy I definitely considered. I didn't really go that route though. Just like kind of the speculation of the Sabres and like everyone's saying they're scared to like kind of make moves. I'm not 100% convinced that Byram will at least get moved during the season. I kind of went with like more of a lower caliber player that I think a team might be able to pick up for some depth. I went with Henry Jokiharju, actually. A guy who's been playing second to third pairing minutes with the Sabres. Don't really think he's kind of panned out of what he's supposed to be, being a late first round pick about 7 or 8 years ago now. I think his time in Buffalo is kind of coming to an end. He's on a 6th season there, and he really just hasn't performed to the highest. And I see the Sabres more making like a minor move with someone like him. Lower cap
Yeah,
it to also, at 2.5.
He also is a UFA at the end of the season too, right? So it's like they really do have that. It's sort of like move him now or you lose him for nothing unless he re-signs with them.
And I don't think they're going to get a lot of value back per se, but I mean, I just see it's more as a guy they could move on from. Team might even pick up as like a 6th, 7th defenseman for a playoff run.
Yeah, I think Buffalo. There's a couple. It's an easier one when I was making this list. Like there's a couple different players you can sort of go for. Jokiharju, he was one of the guys I was sort of thinking of. Byram, I was thinking of. And the other guy, too, was sort of Dylan Cousins. I was sort of thinking about having as my number one trade bait just because of the rumors between him, and it seems like Detroit's very interested in him. But honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think Buffalo really wants to give him up, man. Like, and if I was Buffalo, I
No.
would give him up. I think Jokiharju definitely makes a lot of sense. And for me, I just think Bowen Byram, it doesn't really make sense for the Buffalo Sabres to keep him. For Byram, it doesn't make sense for him to stay there because he's going to be playing behind 2 left-hand shot defensemen.
But I will say, though, I don't
like,
think it makes sense for them to like go out and get a first round pick for him. Like, I think they should try to make a legitimate hockey trade.
I agree there. I don't think that's the type of trade where you're going out and getting a first-round pick unless it's like guaranteed top 5, right? But I think it's more like you try to get somebody who's 20, similar age range, like 25 to sort of 28 years old, somebody that has term on their deal or is 100% going to re-sign there and is similar caliber type of player, but they just need somebody in a different role, right? Like they still need some defensemen on their team, but like they really need a right-hand shot. So it's like the one we had been talking about off the podcast was like if Rasmus Anderson from the Calgary Flames was available, like would Buffalo maybe be interested in that? He has some term left. Like, would Byram go back in a deal like that? That's more the type of trades I'm thinking for
Yeah.
Bo and Byram, not so much the first round picks or young
Yeah.
prospects because they got enough of that. But for
One,
Buffalo, there,
you go ahead.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
I was gonna say one other guy I kind of considered putting on here, but I think they're gonna try and re-sign him is Jason Zucker, just because he's on a 1-year contract and he's playing pretty well. But I think they need some of these more veteran guys, and they're gonna try and lock him up. To be honest.
Oh, for sure they need some veteran guys. But yeah, they're out of the playoffs, so I think they're going to be decently active come trade deadline. Next up in the East, we have the New York Islanders. Mark, who do you have as your top trade bait here?
Man, honestly, there's a couple of guys that I kind of was thinking about putting on here. Um, I've talked a lot about how much Brock Nelson could be a fit in a lot of places, but I don't know if Lou's a little bit too stubborn to move him, to be honest, and he kind of wants to compete. I actually went with JG Pajot. He's on the last year of a 5-year, I think a 5 or a 6-year deal. He's making $5 million a year. I think you're probably going to have to retain a little bit on him. I think he's a pretty solid like third line center, can play the wing as well. He's got some playoff experience, obviously, with the Islanders, with the Sens as well. I don't know if you remember, probably closer to 10 years ago now, he had that 4-goal game against the Rangers when he was with Ottawa in the playoffs. So, I mean, I think he's a guy who's got experience. I think some teams will definitely be interested in him if you get him at $2.5 million. And the other thing is more like Nelson's a higher caliber player. I really wonder if they try to lock him up. You know what I mean? So I just think
Yeah.
that Pajot, his time's kind of running out there, and I could see him on the move.
Yeah, for me, I went with Brock Nelson. Like he's making $6 million a year. If the Islanders were to retain 50%, you could get Brock Nelson for $3 million a year. If you're like a Stanley Cup contender and you can get him playing third line on your second power play, like I think there's a lot of teams that would be interested in that. And the other thing with him is he has a 16 team no trade list, right? So there's still a lot of teams there where you could get yourself into sort of playing the market if you're the Islanders, right? Like if you have five
Yeah.
teams that are super interested in him, like you could get a pretty decent trade package coming back. I know there's been a lot of rumors, right? Like the Leafs is a team that really could make a run at him, but it's like there's going to be more teams than that are going to be interested in
I think
Brock
there's a
Nelson if
couple
he's
other teams that would
available.
be very interested in him, dude. I
So
think
it's
I've
like,
talked about Minnesota. I've talked.
yeah,
I haven't talked about, but I think another team too that would be super interested is Winnipeg. I think that they lack a second line center. I will say, I think Nelson consistently over the past couple of years has been like a 2C. His production has dropped off a little bit this year. His last 3 years before this year, he had 37, 36, and 34 goals.
yeah.
And this year he's down to 13 and 45 games. It's a bit of a down year. So I guess my only question is, does Lou kind of want more value? Like kind of thinking, okay, this is what he's done the past 3 years. And other teams are kind of like, okay, well, this year though, he's got what, 13 goals or we know what I mean? Like it's a drop off a bit, right? In a contract year. So, I mean, I just wonder if Lou will end up like not getting the value he wants and keeps him. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I mean, I think they should move him. I think they should just get value for him and move him.
I agree with that too. And the other thing too is with Lou maybe wanting to be stubborn and keep him, you also got to consider that he is a UFA at the end of the year, right? So it's like
Yeah.
if like Lou and him are probably going to sit down at some point here in the next few weeks and have a discussion of like possibility of Nelson resigning. Because if Nelson says he doesn't really want to resign with the team or he really does want to test the free agency market, then it's like if you're the Islanders, you really probably should trade him at that point if you risk losing him in free agency for nothing. Just before we move on from the Islanders, though, if you were like the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Minnesota Wild, as you mentioned, like what kind of trade packages would you be willing to give up for Brock Nelson?
Um, I think that it's going to be a little bit different for each team because so we're talking about Minnesota, Toronto, Winnipeg. Honestly, I'd probably even throw Colorado in there too. They've been kind of lacking some center depth. Middlestat hasn't played the greatest this year. I think if they could move him down to 3C, that would be ideal. The problem is that Minnesota and Toronto don't have a first round pick this year. Toronto
Yeah,
gave that up in the McCabe trade, and Minnesota gave it up in the Juracek trade. So I mean, I feel like the Islanders are going to want a first round pick, to be quite honest with you. But if not, like Minnesota, I think has some valuable prospects or assets that can kind of make up for that first round pick. You know what I mean? And maybe Lou will want a guy that can more or less like step in instead of getting a first round pick anyway. So I would say like either like a first round pick and like maybe like a lower caliber roster player and like maybe a C prospect or something like that, or maybe we're talking about like a B plus prospect. Maybe it's like 2 seconds instead of a first, and like I don't know, something in that range though. I think something that's got to almost add up to like a late first round pick, because I would say he's
Yeah.
worth it, to be honest with you. And I think with the draft not being the greatest, it's kind of like, do you want Brock Nelson for a playoff run or the 25th overall pick? It's like, I honestly think I'd prefer to take a flyer on Brock Nelson. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'd say either like 2 seconds or like a first and like a lower tier prospect. Maybe if you want to take another player back in a deal to make the cap work, you know what I mean? But kind of something in that range, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. Like maybe like a Fraser Minton in picks if you're the Leafs, or um, if you're Minnesota, like a B prospect, B plus prospect, and some other picks that aren't a first. If you're Colorado, like maybe a Callum Ritchie, like maybe him and some picks, like who knows? But that's I just wanted to see what you thought the market was for what the market price was for Brock
I
Nelson,
just wouldn't say
because
a guaranteed
it's kind of hard to
it's
tell.
a bit of a down year. I wouldn't say a guaranteed first because it's a bit of a down year, to be honest. But like, I think he's close to it at least, and he could pick it up in
Yeah.
this next little bit too. You never know how he does at Four Nations either, dude. Like that's a huge stepping stone, like for the Islanders too. What if he comes out, scores a couple goals, USA wins the tournament? I don't know, right? Like,
And let's keep on moving on here and move on to our next batch of teams. This is where it really starts to get interesting, because you have Pittsburgh here, Detroit, who both have 46 points right now. They are they do have a lot of ground to make up, a lot of teams to pass if they do want to get into the playoffs, but they are only 5 points out of a playoff spot, right? So like it is possible for them to sneak into the playoffs still at this point. So I think in the East, this is where it really gets interesting for these teams, knowing what they're fully going to do. Pittsburgh Penguins, though, I have Marcus Patterson. He's 28 years old. He's got 1 year remaining at just above $4 million. I think there's going to be a lot of teams interested in him if you can get him for 1 year, playoff run at 50% retained. Like he's on a Stanley Cup winning team. He's probably a number three defenseman, right? If you can get that guy for just over $2 million, like fuck, dude, I'm happy with that. But who do you have?
I considered him a lot, and I think there's a good possibility he gets moved. Because of him being an unrestricted free agent this year, and the cap hits reasonable, he could play in the top four. I actually went a little bit of a different route, and you might be surprised. I went with Ricard Raquel. He's having a really solid season this year. I think he's got 22 goals. I just don't believe that the Penguins are going to be close to in it come trade deadline. I do think they're going to kind of fade out. And I think that what he's doing this year, like, I mean, it's not necessarily a career year for him right now. Like, he's had 69 points 1 year in his career. And I mean, he's going to be close to hitting that as well. But I think that with Pittsburgh, you try to sell high, you might be able to get a first round pick for him. Dubas wants to get younger. He could use that first round pick to draft someone. He could use that to potentially go out and get another younger player like he's been doing recently. I think at $5 million, it's a very reasonable cap hit for Ricard Raquel. I think he could probably be plugged into the top six on a lot of different teams in this league, and I think that he'd be a pretty valuable asset for Pittsburgh to move. I think that I just don't know if he's going to replicate this next year, and then it's like then you're kind of more committed to keeping him. You know what I mean? I would be listening to offers at the very least on him.
Yeah, the Ricardo Raquel one is for sure a player I could see getting moved. The only thing that sort of is more of a question mark with him is that he still does have 3 years after this season remaining, making $5 million, right? So it's like you're not going to have those teams like Toronto or Colorado necessarily be in it because they're so close to the cap. And I don't know for those teams if they want to
I
be
don't know
trading
anymore
for
about
players.
Colorado though, dude, because it seems like Landeskog's got another setback, dude.
Yeah,
Right?
maybe not
So
as much Colorado, but more the teams that are really close to the salary cap and don't have much movement, right? It's like if you can get a Brock Nelson 1 year and you know he's a rental, okay, but like or Ricard Raquel, it's like you're guaranteed that there's 3 more years you're going to be paying him $5 million, right? And it's like
Yeah.
it's it's not as much wiggle room as if things don't pan out, right?
No, that's fair, and
Um,
I'm not even like 100% convinced he will be moved, but I think he's definitely a guy that definitely could be, especially because of how good he's playing right now.
what kind of team? Well, like, what kind of teams do you think may be like interested in him if he is getting traded?
I'm not convinced a true Stanley Cup contender might go after him, but like, man, honestly, one team that kind of just comes into my mind, give them some extra scoring and a little bit more experience and help for the future is someone like Utah.
Yeah,
They're kind of making a push for the playoffs. They got a ton of assets. Um, Even if it's not a first round pick they give up, they've got some prospects. They've got a bunch of picks in this year's draft, and they've already drafted a lot of prospects. Like, I would say, why don't you consider moving on from some of that draft capital and bringing in a more experienced guy who, I mean, he's been inconsistent at times in his career, but I mean, if you put him with some good players, and Utah is developing some pretty good players here, I think that might be a decent spot for him, man.
yeah. I think teams sort of in more in that range of the like contendership make more sense. Like maybe a Detroit, I could see them possibly being interested. Like your team, Montreal, I could see Montreal maybe having some interest if the price is right. Like you're getting a more veteran player that can play second, third line minutes, right? Like we talked off the podcast, like Alex Newhook, you don't really see him in the future. It's like if you could bring in Ricard Raquel and ship off Alex Newhook and maybe like
I
a
think Pittsburgh would
second,
definitely
third
be
round
interested
pick.
in that for sure because it's a younger player coming in. Utah's also working with they got $12.2 million in cap space right now. So you
Yeah.
bring in a $5 million player, it's not really the worst thing. Utah's also probably got some younger guys that they might be willing to move. You know what I mean? Like a Michael Carcone or even like a Jack McBain, something like that. Some younger prospects that Pittsburgh might be interested in as well. So honestly, I think Raquel to Utah kind of makes a lot of sense.
I like it. I like it. Next up, we got the Detroit Red Wings. This is a really interesting one for me, but we'll start off with you. Who do you have here?
I think this was more of a difficult one for me. I wasn't really convinced of one guy that I think they could move on from just because uh they've been really good recently, but I mean they started off not great. They want to make the playoffs. I went with a guy that's been on the team for a while, and I don't really know if he needs a change of scenery or he's just not good enough. I went with Joe Veleno. I don't really think he's produced nearly enough in his career to be a first round pick like he was. He's got 9 points in 42 games this year. Todd McCullough gave him a chance on the first line right when he got there a couple weeks ago. I'm just not convinced he's that great of a player, to be honest with you. He's more of like a two-way guy. And I think that you could maybe get him out in a deal, $2.275 million cap, bring someone else and potentially help you with some scoring depth for the playoff run. Maybe Ricard Raquel, you know what I mean? I don't know, like something like that,
Yeah.
like a swap in that sense. But I think Joe Veleno's time in Detroit's coming to an end.
So for me, I actually went with a prospect here. I went with Nate Danielson. He's
Okay.
22 years old. He's on his ELC. As you mentioned, like Detroit, it's a tough team to gauge because it's like they want to make the playoffs, but realistically, like, are they going to make the playoffs? They're a bit far out. They got a bunch of teams they have to jump if they do make the playoffs. But like it seems like Stevie Y is committed to making this team better and not necessarily being a seller come trade deadline, right? So it's like Nate Danielson, if you trade him, you could get a very decent player, like a Ricardo Cal type player, probably in return for him. Even maybe a bit more, right? So it's
The
like,
one thing I'll say about Detroit though is like I'm not convinced they need a Ricard Raquel. I'm more convinced they need a second line center.
yeah, I think they need a center as well. But I,
Raquel might make
for
sense though because I don't think Tarasenko's been what he was supposed to be either, right? So maybe.
even if it's not Raquel, like I think with if you're trading Danielson, you can still get a player that's sort of in that caliber, right?
Yeah,
Where if if they're, I don't think they want to give up their first round pick this year. Um, some of their other young players, it's like Sandin Pellikka. Are you going to trade him? Unless you're trading Sandin Pellikka, like you got to be getting a ton back for him. The one,
I wouldn't.
the
I
other
wouldn't
thing
move him.
too is why I'm sort of thinking Nate Danielson is because if they really are trying to make a run at Dylan Cousins, which it seems like kind of are. I think Nate Danielson is a player that would be going back in a Dylan Cousins trade.
Okay. I could see that happening.
Next up, we got the Philadelphia Flyers. I went with Scott Laughton here. He's 30 years old. He's got 2 years left, making $3 million. He's, I think he's a great third line center. If you're a contender, you probably wouldn't have to give up the sun and moon for him, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of teams interested in him if if you're making the playoffs. The thing is how interested is Philly in moving on from him because he's been pretty good for Philly at times, right? And for Philly, who's sort of trying to come out of this rebuild,
He's a
he's a
lifer
good
there too.
veteran. He's a good veteran. He's a good veteran player for them, right? So I don't know if Philly's necessarily fine with giving him up, but who do you have for the Flyers?
He was one guy I considered, and we'll talk about him more in a second with Scott Laughton. But one guy I went with, I just don't really know where his future is with this team, is Joel Farabee. He's having a bit of a down year this year. He's got 16 points in 44 games. He had a really good year last year. He had 50. But he's been kind of consistently in that below 40-point range. He was a pretty high pick, too, like 14th overall in 2018.
Yeah,
I don't really think that his career has definitely panned out in the right direction. The only thing is someone going to want to take him on it at a $5 million cap hit till 2028? There's 3 more years left. Does someone think that they could turn this guy into some sort of like a top 6 player? He's only had 20 goals once in his career. I just, with Michkov coming in, and they've got some pretty good wingers for the future, man.
you got
Like I
Konechny,
like
you got
Tyson
Tippett.
Forster a lot. I like Forster as like a more of a third middle six guy. I like Owen Tippett. Konechny they just committed to. Lawton's been playing the wing a decent amount as well. So I just don't really see a spot for Joel Farabee on this team in the future, and I could see him getting moved.
Yeah, I could see Farabee getting moved for sure. And you mentioned that 4 or 3 years after this season at 5 million, I think there would be some teams honestly pretty willing to take that on because with the cap going up this year, it's not going to be as bad if it doesn't pan out.
It's not
He's
that
also
insane of a contract if you can get
yeah,
him to be that 50-point player.
he's also 24 years old too, right? So it's
Yeah.
like look at Line A, right? Line A goes to Montreal. He's in a new situation, and it's looking like it honestly looks like Line A is the type of player that his contract is on right now, right? It's like Fairby, if you're a team and you can pick him up, it doesn't take as much improvement for him to be worth that $5 million. And for him, he's 24 too, right? So he's younger than Line was when he got traded. So it's like there's definitely even more room for him to growth and turn into the player that we sort of think he's going to become. And if I'm Philly, I'd definitely be interested in moving on from him. The only thing is like if you're Philly moving on from Farabee, what kind of return are you looking for, do you think?
Honestly, there will only be a couple select teams that can do it, but I would look for some immediate help in that.
Yeah,
You think Anaheim would be
maybe
interested and they can do some sort of a Gibson swap?
I think
Because
Anaheim
I'd
would
consider
for
it.
sure be interested. Because the other thing too is Anaheim. You think they're gonna like we're gonna talk about them later, of course, but you think they're gonna be sellers this year, right? So it's like maybe they move on from a Frank Vetrano or something like that.
I doubt that
Vetrano
though. They
just
just
signed.
re-signed him.
Yeah, he just signed, so it's not that likely. But they're probably going to move on from some sort of scoring piece in their lineup. So replacing him with Fairby, and might be willing to do that.
I think they
I don't
also
know, but
expected Robbie Fabry to come in and be a lot more effective than he was this year as well with
yeah,
Anaheim.
yeah, it's
And I think
it's going to be
like
interesting.
Gibson makes 6.5 ish, Fairby 5. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously going to be more pieces to the deal. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 swap if it happened, but I think that it's an interesting starting point and a decent gamble for the Ducks to make.
Yeah, I like it for both sides. There would be interesting to see that happen. Next up, we have the New York Rangers. Who do you have for them?
It's kind of hard, man. There's been a lot of guys rumored to get moved on this team. It seems like at some point they're basically trying to almost willing to move anyone besides like Panarin, Fox, and Shesterkin. I went with a defenseman and a younger piece on this team. You might be surprised. I went with Zach Jones. I think he's actually been playing pretty well this year, and I don't think the Rangers are giving him enough opportunity. He's only played 26 games. He's got 8 points, pretty good skater, puck mover. I think a team might look at him at his really low cap hits. He's making under $1 million. I think he's definitely a movable piece. I mean, there's obviously been rumors about the JT Miller. What if he goes there? What can be in return? I don't know. The Canucks might want a piece like Zach Jones, a younger defenseman that can move the puck, play in the top 4 at times, but probably more of a bottom pairing defenseman at this point. There's a couple other guys that I'd be willing to put on this list, but I kind of went a little bit off the board, and I feel like he's been like up and down almost with the Rangers the past couple of years. Like, it's almost like this is his time, and then it's not. It's almost like these little Juracek Nemec situations. I know it's not the same thing. They're not the same caliber of pick, but I just don't know if there's a future for him there, and I think he's kind of an easy piece to move off of because of his low cap hit.
For me, I went with Keandre Miller. Like
I considered
Keandre
it.
Miller this season, he's really struggled at times. It really does look like he needs a fresh start with a new team.
I have a question. Sorry, before you say that, I have a question about that though. The reason why I did not do this is because I thought, okay, you move on from Miller, they're probably not going to re-sign Lindgren, and then what does your left side look like? That's why I didn't do it. Like going into next year, I was kind of skeptical of it, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are.
See, the thing is, if I'm New York, I'm honestly not worried about that, man. Because if you
Okay.
keep Miller, like I don't think the Rangers want to keep Miller. I don't know if Miller even really wants to stay at this point, man. Like it kind of looks like he really does need a fresh start, right? I think it makes the most amount of sense to trade him while he still has some value. And he's an RFA at the end of the season too, right? So it's like, do you really want to trade him when knowing a team is going to have to come in and go through the whole negotiation process like
And
the
his
week
qualifying
after?
offer is just under $4 million.
So it's like with Miller, I think it makes the most amount of sense for the Rangers to trade him this season. The other thing too is the Rangers, they want to get better, right? Like they're not a team that's going to be selling and wanting to get all these picks coming in and go through a full on rebuild. So it's like if they are making a trade for the JT Miller, I think Keandre Miller would be involved in that trade at some sort of piece, right? Because salary he's making, his cap hit's 3.87, right? So it's like he still has a decent cap hit where you could send him out and bring some money in and not have to send out like a Mika Zibanejad where it's a team's going to have to take on that whole contract. With the Keandre Miller one, it's not as bad for a team to take on that Keandre Miller contract for one season, and the cap's going to sort of work itself out a little bit. The other thing with him too is, to be honest, I I think like you mentioned Zachary Jones, you can give him a shot, right? You mentioned Ryan Lindgren that he's a UFA, and what does their sort of left hand side look like for the future? It's the New York Rangers, right? Like I think for them, they are not worried about making runs at people in free agency
Yeah, that's a
and
good point.
being able to sort of fill those holes through free agency. Like when I was sort of making this list and I was looking at the caps for every team. Like there's like Jacob Chikrin, he's a guy that's a free agent this year, right? It's like, of course, Washington is probably going to want to keep him, but it's like, does New York like you would imagine that if Miller and Lindgren are gone, that New York would be sort of in the mix there, right? Like there's
Yeah,
some good
that's an interesting name.
there's some good free agents this year back on defense, and New York you're going to imagine that they're going to be involved in a lot of those guys if they lose Lindgren and Miller. Let's move on. Next up, we have the Boston Bruins. Mark, I think this might be the first one where we both have the same player. We'll start with you. Who do you have?
I went with Trent Frederick. He's been rumored to get moved for quite some time now. I think that it seems like they've had interest in bringing him back beyond this year, but it seems like they can't really find a sweet spot in negotiations for what they both want here. I think that some playoff teams would be very interested in this guy in their bottom 6. He doesn't obviously score a lot, 17, 18 goals the last couple of years, not bad. He's at 7 right now. Not really sure if he's going to hit that pace, only 14 points. But I mean, manageable cap hit, 2.3 million. I think that some team might be very interested in bringing him in for the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I went with Trent Frederick as well here for the Boston Bruins. As you mentioned, like he has good cap hit, so there's definitely going to be some teams interested in bringing him in for a playoff run. He was a UFA in the summer though too, right? And like we've talked about this off the podcast, but Trent Frederick seems like a type of player where in UFA he's going to get overpaid by somebody.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's like Boston, they don't want to give him that contract, so it makes the most amount of sense for Boston to move off of him and get some sort of return where you don't lose him for nothing in free agency. Boston's a weird team though too, man. Where it's like, are they sellers? Are they buyers? Kind of, what are they? I think they're going to be pretty sort of stick with what they got and not make too many moves. But the one guy is,
Maybe try to make a
I think,
hockey move, almost like a one for. I wouldn't be
yeah,
surprised, to be honest, if Frederick's in like a 1-for-1 swap. I wouldn't
yeah,
be surprised whatsoever.
yeah. I wouldn't be surprised by that
Do you
at
see
all.
any place for him to go? Like, is there anywhere in mind that you're thinking that would make a lot of sense?
Not off the top of my head. I'm thinking teams that maybe lack a bit of physicality and could use a bigger forward, somebody who's a bit more physical, like New Jersey maybe. The Devils, like they lack a bit of size and
That's interesting. That
physicality.
was not a team I
I,
was thinking of.
I could potentially see them, especially for the cap hit, right? Like that's not hard to sort of figure out what with his cap hit. And then looking at the West, it's a bit hard. Like maybe I could, I could see a St. Louis man.
That's what I was thinking too, but I because they're out and he's a rental, I just don't know. Unless they're convinced they can
Yeah,
sign him.
that's the thing. If they're convinced that they can re-sign him, then I could really see St. Louis because
See, I was more
Dougie
thinking
Armstrong's
West.
always pulling something off.
I was thinking West when I was looking at teams, and I got three teams that I think that could be interested in him for the bottom six. One is Dallas. I think he'd be a pretty good fit there, and then the other two that I think that would be a good fit is Edmonton and Vegas.
Yeah,
I think that those three teams could be very interested in bringing in a guy like that because they all have got their guys. You know what I mean? They're guys that can put the puck in the net, but I mean more of like grindy. Not that they don't have grindy guys, but I mean like when you get to the playoffs, like you can't really have too much of it. I would say, like you know what I mean. Like if he's able to kind of chip in at other areas of the ice, like I love Keegan Colasar with Vegas, but like if you could bring in another guy like that, like I mean, you could even separate them on lines. Like I think it'd be a really hard team to play against. You know what I mean?
yeah. The thing that I think with Trent Frederick though is I think some team is gonna overvalue him. Like
That's
I think
fair.
some
But like,
teams.
but my
I think
question is like, what if he turns into like what if we're talking about Trent Frederick in a couple years and he's like similar to like Barbashev, dude? Because to be fair, like Barbashev only had a couple of like pretty solid seasons with the Blues. Like he wasn't like this huge commodity. Like I
yeah.
would argue like he has that style where you bring him in, he's effective, but like the points he's putting up this year, like he's never done that before in his career, dude. Like you know what I mean? So it's like I don't know. I kind of see that's why I see Vegas as a decent fit. Like he's almost like a not as good Barbashev.
That's Yeah, I think that's a decent comparison. The one I was kind of like thinking though is if it turns out bad is that like a Tanner Jeannot situation
That's that. Yeah.
where because when I look at him, I look at him like for me it's
I'd argue
comparable
that
to
he's
when
as good as
Tampa
Tanner
gave up
Jeannot
that.
now, though. And I think you're more thinking about like if we give him this long contract. I think the problem with Tanner Jeannot is never the money he makes; it's what he was given up for. Like Tampa only
Yeah, I
gave him
think
two
that's
million
more what the
bucks,
issue
right?
was.
Yeah, it was just like they valued him so high that I don't see another team valuing Frederick like that, though.
Let's move on to your team, Mark. We have the Montreal Canadiens. You're the Habs fan on the podcast, so we'll start off with you. Who do you have here?
Fuck, dude. I don't know. I took this is probably the team I took the longest on considering the situation now, and it's like, are we really going to be a buyer? Are we really going to like are we a seller? Like, what is happening? Are we standing pat? To be completely honest with you, if I could answer this question and say no one on our current roster, I would. But I went with a guy who's a UFA. I think some teams could be interested in for down the lineup. I went with Yoel Armia. I just don't think that the Habs are going to be able to re-sign him. I think he's going to want a little bit too much money. I think that they might consider moving on from him. He's been pretty effective this year, especially on the penalty kill. I think a contender might be looking at him and willing to give up assets for him. But I'm still not convinced that Montreal is going to be making a move where they're going to be sending a player out.
So the guy I went with here is Christian Dvorak.
Okay.
I think I think you guys are going to be looking to make a hockey move where it makes your team better now, but also you're not giving up a first round pick or like a bunch of young prospects type of stuff.
I think a center would have to be coming back in the deal, though, because that's what we're lacking right now. We don't really have a lot of centers, and Newhook has not been playing center the past like
Yeah,
25 games. We've been running with Suzuki, Doc, Evans, and Dvorak. So, I mean, I don't mind it, but I feel like a center might be having to come back in the deal. Like they called up Owen Beck yesterday, and he played, but he didn't play center. But it's like I don't really know if we're competing for a playoff spot and we're right there. As much as I like Owen Beck for the future more than Dvorak, I don't know if it's the right move. You know what I
I
mean?
think you guys, I think you guys sort of need a third line center that's like because Christian Dvorak was supposed to be that for you guys
He was
when you
supposed to be a
got him,
top
right? Like
six center, dude.
a top. Ideally, he would have been a top six, but like at worst, he would have been your third line center, like a 40, like 35, 40 point player a year, right? Like where he has not been that whatsoever. Like this season, he has 4 goals, 10 assists for 14 points so far. And he had 2 points last night, right? So if you take out last night's game, he has 3 goals all season. Like he has not panned out so whatsoever so far. He's making pretty much 4.5 million too, right? So it's like if you guys are trying to make one of those kind of hockey trades and bring a guy in that it still does have term left on his contract, I think it makes a lot of sense that Christian Dvorak would be involved in that deal somehow with that cap hit. And the other thing too is the team you're sending him to, assuming they're not going to be a playoff team, probably wouldn't mind taking on that contract because it's going to be done at the end of the year, right? So you
Yeah,
don't got to worry
100%.
about that contract for the next few years. Next up, we got the Columbus Blue Jackets. I went with Ivan Provorov here. He's 28 years old. He got 1 year left, making about $4.725 million a year. If Columbus is willing to retain on the contract, I think they could get a decent bit back for him. It's kind of weird though with Columbus because like they're in a playoff spot right now. So it's like, are you really going to be trying to give up Ivan Provorov? Who knows? Do you think Provorov's gone from Columbus, or
Yeah, I do.
do you think they're trying to keep him?
No, I think he's gone. I think he's gone because I think Denton Matejchuk coming up and the impact he's had has made him movable. And I know that Provorov's a better player at the moment, but I think that they more look at it as okay. Provorov can give us some value here in a trade. We can get some assets, regardless if they want to try and get an actual NHL player or picks, whatever they're looking for here. But I think with Matejchuk coming up, Provorov becomes expendable. I'm not really like he was more or less the only guy on this team that I had that I was considering for this list because I don't really know
Yeah,
who else they would move, dude, unless they were trying to move a young guy. But it's like their young guys are playing fairly well, man.
and they also already
It's like I
moved
don't
a
want to
young
move
guy.
Marchenko. Like fuck that, dude. He's playing good. Keep him. That's a guy you need for the future. You know what I mean? I'm not trading Marchenko. I guess the only other guy I'd consider if they wanted to move on from him was Chinnikov. But I mean, he's been playing pretty good this year as well, right? So
Yeah,
unless
I
you're willing to move like Cole Sillinger,
Cole Sillinger would be a guy that I'd maybe be willing to move on from if I'm
I still
Columbus,
think
but
Provorov's more likely to go though.
same. Before we move on from him though, like I'm assuming that if they move on from him, they're going to retain money because that's where they're going to get the most amount of value back, and they got a lot of cap space, so it's not an issue for them. What kind of return though are you looking for if you're Columbus? Because they're in a playoff spot right now, right? So it's like I don't know if they're going to be looking to get like picks back if they're trading Ivan Provorov, right?
Yeah, that's the problem is I just don't really know exactly what a good return would be for him. I mean, if you're getting him at two and change, that's some good value, dude. Like he okay, he hasn't been what he's supposed to be. He was a top 10 pick. He had that 1 year where he had like 18 goals, got that long contract. Um I'd probably say he's a little bit overpaid if he had the full cap hit, but I mean, I'd still say he's like a $5 million at least defenseman. The amount of money he eats, he can break the puck out well. He blocks a ton of shots. Um, my thing is though is that I think they might have to almost take futures, dude. Because what contending team is going to be like, we'll give you 2 roster players for Ivan Provorov.
Yeah, like I don't think there's going to be a contending team that's doing that. And then all the teams that are sort of out of contention, you're not going to be wanting a rental player like this, right?
I think they might
That's
almost
where it
have
gets
to
really
take the
hard for
like
me.
L in the sense that like if they do want to move him, then they're gonna have to get assets. Maybe they can get a younger player in the deal, but like also like if you're Columbus, do you really want like a young forward back? Like you kind of already have a lot of them.
I'd be more interested in getting a defenseman back. Honestly, like he is a UFA, so I don't know how much the Rangers would want to do this, but like
I
Provorov,
want.
Provorov for Miller, maybe like
I don't
some
know if
sort
the
of trade
Rangers would do
involving
that.
those
I don't
two.
think the Rangers would do that.
That's the thing, though. It's with the Rangers like not guaranteeing the playoffs. It's like, are you really wanting to get a rental piece right now?
I think the
Like,
in
probably
division thing
not.
too with Philly might be, and the fact that you trade him in division's probably not ideal. Two teams that I think that could use Ivan Provorov, and I think that if you retain half would definitely benefit them a lot. One, Edmonton really need a top 4 defenseman. If they can't bring in a right-handed guy, he'd definitely be a guy I'd be interested in. And the other one is Florida. I think that after losing Montour OEL, I think that he'd be a pretty good replacement in there that could play a lot of minutes, top 4. I mean, can he run the power play? I mean, maybe when he's playing with these elite players, but I honestly
Yeah.
think those two teams make a lot of sense for Provorov.
Honestly, I like the Edmonton one because if you're Edmonton, you can probably get a guy like Matthew Savoy who like you probably could put Savoy in your lineup if you're Columbus and
Yeah.
have him make some
Been
sort of an
tearing up the A
impact.
too.
Yeah, so it's like that Edmonton's an interesting one because like for Columbus, at least you are still getting like you are getting a young player back. You, the better player in that trade right now probably is Provorov, but at least you're still getting a player back that can have some sort of impact in the
You
NHL
never know, like
as
Edmonton,
Columbus
like
is looking to make the
what if
playoffs.
Columbus doesn't get an extension done and like Matthew Olivier is available? Like that'd be a great guy for the Oilers to also get if they were willing to
Yeah,
give up the assets, right? Like I don't know, man. I think those two teams, like you're not trading him in division. It kind of makes a lot of sense that like they both kind of need a top 4 defenseman that can move the puck and skate well. And I think that's what Provorov is at this point in his career.
I completely agree with you on that. Let's move on to the Ottawa Senators. This one was probably the hardest team for me to come up and find somebody that I think is going to get traded here before the deadline. Before I look like a dumbass because I think my pick might be completely terrible. Mark, I want to see who you have here for the Ottawa Senators.
Okay, Ottawa. This was a little bit of a difficult one as well. I don't really know exactly what they want to do going forward because they do have some injuries, right? And
Yeah,
they're not going to be subtracting a lot, but I do wonder if because they are kind of tight to the cap and Allmark's coming back and this Marilyn guy's playing well, I really wonder if Anton Forsberg becomes expendable on the last year of his contract, 2.75 million. I mean, for goaltending depth, you probably want to keep him, but in the sense of if you really want to go out and get something and you got to make the salary work, I think he's a guy that can be moved. Because I think Marilyn has proved that he can probably be at least a backup for the rest of this year, right? And you're getting him
yeah.
at under $1 million. So it's like Forsberg played well yesterday, but he hasn't had a good season. I think a team might be willing to just take him on for the rest of the year. Like maybe even they'd consider re-signing him if he plays well for a cheap contract, right? So I went with Anton Forsberg, but I mean, there was no clear-cut obvious choice for me.
You know what? So originally I had Adam Gaudette.
I don't
Like
see it, dude. He's
it,
playing too well.
that's what I was thinking, but for me, it's like they could get a pretty decent return for him. And like I don't think they're going to be able to re-sign him to be honest. Like he's making no money this year. He's making
Well, he was in the
775K.
AHL last year.
Yeah, like he's making no money right now. He's playing phenomenal. Like he's a guy that's probably going to get paid around $2 million a year, you think, in free agency
See,
if
but
he
I think
keeps on
Ottawa would
having the
give him
season he's
that.
having.
I think because I think too is that the one thing that you're missing in this is that the best best years of his career he's been under Travis Green, and I think that's a reason
Yeah.
why they brought him back. And I think that just coming off 1 year, unless he ends up getting 30, he's not going to be demanding that much. I honestly disagree. I think that if it's a manageable cap hit, they can bring him back.
See, I'm gonna change mine, man, and I'm gonna change it to Forsberg. I agree with you, and you swayed me. For me, when I was doing this Ottawa one, it was so hard to because they're gonna be looking to make their team better, but it's like
Yeah, like do they want
the way their
like for
contracts are. Like the way their contracts are, it's like I don't know how you make this team better without shipping off money, and like there's nobody really expiring soon where you can put that deal in except for close Giroux. To like you're not trading Giroux because you're going to be making the team worse. I'm going Forsberg, dude. I agree with you, man. Like he's got 1 year left. The way this other goalie's been playing, like Forsberg is going to be. It's not the end of the world if Ottawa moves on from him, and honestly, there probably will be some sort of market for him. What were you going to say though?
I was gonna say, what do you see them like going after? For their lineup, like what do you think they need?
I think they need a bit of depth pieces, to be honest.
On
Like
both up front and the back end?
more, more up front. Like the back end, I think they're fine. They're have a like they have an injury to Bernard Docker right now, right? Which isn't really helping. But like when he comes back, their back end is pretty good. Like you had Zub, Jensen, Shabbat, Sanderson, Bernard Docker. Like maybe they could use like a 1-5-6 defenseman, like an older
That's what
veteran
I think.
guy. I think they maybe could use that on the back end. I don't really think they need though. I don't think they need anybody though in their top four, to be honest. I think they more need a
No, I
guy
don't
that
either.
like I think they more need a guy that can play on the bottom pairing. If he's healthy scratched a game in the playoffs, like it's not the end of the deal. I think they more need that kind of guy on the back end. And then up front, I'd say like maybe like a third line scoring type of player.
I think the one thing that they were relying on this year that obviously didn't turn out because of personal issues and now an injury was Perron. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
he probably would have been that's kind of the player we're talking about they need, right? And he hasn't even played this much this year at all. I agree with that. I think a couple of things they could look at is potentially a 4C. They're using Zach Ostapchuk right now. He's playing decent, but I mean, I'd love to bring in like more of a veteran guy, I guess. And then the other thing was, like you said, on defense. I think that a bottom pairing defenseman would do this team pretty good, just because more they're relying on when they're healthy, Clevin, and it's either Bernard Docker or Hamonic. And I think that they
Yeah.
could improve on that. One team that I think that they should be calling and seeing what the ask is Nashville. I think if you could bring in a Jeremy Lazon or even a Luke Shen, that it could really help this team on the back end, and they'd be even scarier to play against. That's the one thing about their back end is like I like their top four, to be honest. I think that Zub is solid. I honestly, you could call me crazy, and I know Chikrin's been great, but I think Nick Jensen is a guy that they've really needed. I think his
Yeah.
stability on defense, like I honestly think you could say Washington won the trade, but I wouldn't really consider Ottawa a huge loser, to be honest with you. I wouldn't at all. I think Nick Jensen's really a guy they need to be stable on the back end. And I think if you could bring in a guy like Lazon or fucking Luke Shen who lays the body, dude, I think this is more of a scarier team you're looking at.
Yeah, I think Luke Shen is a great name for them to go out and
And
target.
he's
Like
a guy,
that's
like you
kind of
said,
the
he doesn't
defenseman
have
I'm
to be in the
thinking.
lineup every night. He doesn't have
Yeah.
to.
If you're sitting him some nights, it's fine. Like Luke, and Luke Shen is a guy that has done that before, and it doesn't affect his game, right? Because there are some guys where it's like you sit in the press box for a night, and it's like you come back for the next game, and they're not good because they're not used to that, and it's sort of almost like shell shocks them a little bit, right? So I think
Yeah.
Luke Shen's a great name there that you brought up. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Lightning. We're really starting to get into the buyers now here, where these guys are going to be buyers. Who do you have for Tampa?
Tampa, this is hard, right? Because they don't really subtract a lot of players from their roster. Um, I think they'll try to do something up front, but I mean, I don't think they're going to be trading anyone up front. The one guy that I think that could be out the door this year to upgrade their back end is Nick Perbix. He came in from college a couple years ago. Pretty nice little player, but kind of more of like a number 5 guy at this point in his career. And I think that Radish and Cernak are kind of just above him in the depth chart. I could see Tampa bringing in another more experienced defenseman to play back there and Nick Perbix being out the door.
So for me, the guy I went with is Ethan Gauthier, 19 years old. He's on his ELC. He's playing in the QMJHL this year. I think he was like 40 points for Drummondville in like 30 games or something like that.
Playing the
Like
World Juniors this year.
For Tampa, if they're gonna be buyers, which we know they're gonna be buyers and looking to add to this team, they're either gonna be moving on, like they're gonna be letting go of picks or younger players. And when you look at that, they don't have a whole bunch of that stuff, right? Like the one player that they have this year, Geeky, like I don't think you want to move on from him. He's like decent at points playing up in the NHL. Like you're not moving on from him. And like I think their next best prospect is probably this Gauthier kid. So that's why I
Or
think
Isaac
that
Howard.
Isaac Howard as well. But honestly, the way Isaac Howard's been playing in the NCAA this year, I don't think there's a fucking chance you want to move on from him, man.
No, yeah, that's fair.
And the other thing with Isaac Howard too is Isaac Howard a guy maybe that Tampa signs at the end of the year and comes up and plays in the NHL?
Maybe.
Like could you see that with him?
Honestly,
Like
no, I don't, to be honest, because I don't think Tampa really does that a lot with bringing in young guys. But to be fair, they also haven't had the luxury of really having the young guys because they play so well and don't have the opportunity to draft. I don't see it with Tampa, to be honest. I don't really know if he's got the best impact, but I mean, I could see him getting a shot with the team next year.
see, I just wonder, man, because like he's had a phenomenal season in the NCAA this year, dude. 36 points in 24 games so far this season. It's like maybe maybe he doesn't get like a real good shot with Tampa this year, but I could see where he gets signed at the end of the year and gets some sort of playing time and maybe gets sent down to the AHL.
Yeah,
But I think this is a player that we'll see getting signed at the end of the season. Like I don't think he goes back to Michigan State again next year.
no, I doubt it.
Next up, we're going to stay in Florida. We got the Florida Panthers. I went with Thomas Nosek here. I this was a hard one for me, man. But Thomas Nosek really hasn't had much of an impact with Florida. I think that's a player that they can move on from and fill his role with a bit better quality. Who do you have though?
That was interesting. I didn't really think you were going to say him at all. I went with a pretty decent roster player actually, because I think they just might want to try and upgrade on this guy. I went with Ichu Luisterainen. I know he's pretty solid, but I mean, I think that if the opportunity presented himself and they were able to get like a pretty solid third liner, maybe younger or even more experienced, along with like a defenseman that like Luis Serrano might be the guy out the door. And also with them being so tight to the cap, um, if you really want to bring in a guy with money, you're gonna have to give a guy away with money. $3 million, I mean, is a decent chunk of change. So
Yeah,
he's been decent on their playoff runs. I don't really say he's been great. That's kind of why I'm more willing to let go of him, I guess, per se. But I think that if they want to make a significant deal, that Luis Serrano might be on his way out.
yeah. For me, Florida was a hard one, sort of deciding here because it's like the number one guy you think that's like most likely not going to be on this team going into next season. They're not moving on from right now, right? Like I would like Aaron Ekblad. He's not getting traded, but it's like I think that could be an interesting piece, to be honest, man, because it's like, do you think Ekblad is re-signing in Florida or no?
I really think it depends on the money.
Like, see, I'm all with you on that, man. It's like Florida, they got two big UFAs this year with an Ekblad and Sam Bennett, and it's like, do you really? For me, it's like we know they're not scared of making these big moves. Like, do we really think that both of these guys are going to go to UFA and potentially move on? Like I'm sort of wondering almost is like, are we going to see an Aaron Ekblad or a Sam Bennett maybe get moved in sort of a surprise deal? Like, could you see that happening at all? One of these guys getting moved?
No, I don't. I
No.
think Florida's looking for D. I don't think they're willing to get rid of it right now. And then I think Bennett's just too big of a contributor, man. I think they're going to worry about the future when it gets to it. I think it's like other top teams. That's how they kind of just deal with it.
Yeah.
I will say I think one of the two of them will probably come back. I don't think they can both afford it. My one thing is that I'd prefer Bennett back, but if you lose Ekblad, it's very hard to replace that. But also, like, there's not a fucking chance in hell I'm giving Ekblad a cent more than he makes now. I'm not even
I'm
convinced
not
he's a
giving.
$7.5 million player, like at all.
The other thing with Bennett though, too, to be honest though, is like I don't
Did I say
like
Bennett?
how much
I meant Ekblad.
you did say Ekblad, but more
Okay.
like what I'm thinking with Bennett though is I think some team's gonna overpay him to a point where like Florida is like, "Well, we can't give you that money," and then it's gonna come
True,
down
but
to
look at
him being
Reinhardt
like, "How
last
much
year,
does he
dude. He
want to stay
probably would have
for?"
got 10
Yeah.
plus. Reinhardt probably would have got 10 plus, and Bennett's familiar there, won a cup. Who knows what kind of run they go on this year? He might just want to stay.
If you're before we move on from Florida and get into the last couple teams in the Eastern Conference, how much money do you think Sam Bennett would get paid in free agency?
Probably between 7 and 8.
7 and 8. Do you think Florida would be willing to give that up? Because to be honest, like
Probably.
I look at I look at Carter Verhaeghe, who's making $7 million starting next season, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to pay Sam Bennett more than Carter Verhaeghe. Like they have completely different impacts, completely different roles, but it's like if Verhaeghe's making seven, like Sam Reinhart's making 8.63, right? Like, do you really want to be paying Sam Bennett 50K or 500K less a year than Sam Reinhart? I'm
Okay, this is more
I'm not
my
necessarily sure.
this is more what I think about, okay? Talk to me after the playoffs and we'll see how Anton Lundell does.
Anton
That's
Lundell, that's fair.
because then I'm really going to be able to see, is this guy the future 2C of this team? Um, he's making 5 million bucks. I mean, I think it's a pretty solid deal for what he could be, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I feel like I'm not ready to answer that question unless I see another playoff run.
No, that's fair. There's still a lot that's going to change here. Like we're
I say
46
that because
to
they're in a
50 games in,
situation
right?
from a guy that can probably become a 2C who's on a very reasonable contract moving forward if he's a 2C. Lundell.
Yeah. Next up, we got the Carolina Hurricanes. Mark, who do you have for them?
Man, this team's so fucking hard to figure out. They
Oh
don't want to
yeah.
go for rentals. They got a really solid roster right now. I mean, I'm sure that there might be looking for an upgrade. I went with Jack Drury. He was a first round pick a couple years ago. Um, hasn't really panned out. Pretty solid, like two-way defensive guy. But I could see Carolina maybe looking for an upgrade at the center position, and he would be a guy that's definitely expendable at a low cap hit. And teams might be
See,
interested because he's young.
yeah. I was looking at Jury as a possibility. The one that I'm going with though is Scott Morrow.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe he's 22 years old. He's on his entry level contract. I think he's an expendable piece that a lot of teams would be interested in if they're giving up a player to Carolina. Like he's a right hand shot. He's sort of more your like stay at home, shut down defenseman. And then for Carolina, the reason I think they're willing to give him up is because they have this Alexander Nishkin kid. Like I
Nikishin,
have
yeah.
Nikishin, I have no clue what's going on with him, but like Carolina values him, I think, a lot more than they probably value this the Scott Morrow kid, which is why I think he may be available. And I know you said like Carolina, they don't really do the whole rental thing. The one thing was I'm wondering if that might change more now that they have new management, right?
I just
Like,
wonder though, because the owner's so involved that I wonder if it's him,
yeah,
right?
because yeah, if the owner's involved, then it's not going to change. But I don't know. They did it. They did it last year with Gensel. Like Tulski's in charge now. Like I could see a possibility where maybe it changes a bit, and they are willing to do more of a rental idea. For them though, what do you think they should really be targeting? Like a
I think they lack
or like
center.
third
I
line
think they lack a
scoring?
centerman. I think they
Yeah,
lack a 2C. And I think they've lacked it for years since Trocheck left. I really
Yep.
do. I don't think Kotkaniemi's the guy. Jordan Staal, very solid bottom six responsible forward. And Jack Drury's not it either, man. Nikash, obviously, it doesn't work at center.
Yep.
I think that they should target another centerman. I really do. I think their D is fine. I think the replacements they made this year actually have worked out really well. I didn't think they would, but I mean, they're paying guys less, right, than like what Pesce and Shea got. But like Walker's good, fucking Gostisbehere's looking good. Their D are fine. I wouldn't really change anything unless an opportunity presented itself that you think you can't pass up. The other thing I think they're really going to be looking for too, and I think they need, is insurance in net.
Yeah, I agree there. Their goaltending with Anderson, you never know what's going to happen with him. I could see him getting a goaltender, not a big name like the John Gibsons and stuff, but
No,
I
I
could
don't
definitely
see that.
see him. I could definitely see him getting a goaltender that, like a
They might even
third
go
goalie
after a
that,
backup.
yeah, like a backup third goalie that you're not afraid to throw in for a game in the playoffs if you need to.
I think that Carolina values goaltending a lot different than a lot of other teams because they know how good they are defensively. That they don't think they need to go out and spend $7-8 million on a goalie, and they can plug in a decent goalie and it'll work out well.
Yeah, like a Devin Cooley maybe, or like maybe not Cooley, but um, it's
Anton
like
Forsberg.
Forsberg maybe, like that'd be an interesting one. The cap hit, I don't know, like if they would want retention on that. To be honest, I don't know if Ottawa would want to retain, but that could be an interesting one. I think I think as you mentioned, like Carolina, they're good on D. I think their gaps are more on forward. They probably needed a bit more scoring, probably a 2C,
They
and
might
then
pick up like a
some.
depth D guy, but I don't see them picking up a guy
Yeah,
that's going to be like in their lineup consistently.
yeah, I agree with that. Let's move on to the New Jersey Devils. Mark, this is where I have a pretty big name here. I got number 2 overall pick, Simon Nemec. 20 years old, is on his ELC. There's been rumors that he's kind of maybe wants out. New Jersey, they seem like a team that could make a pretty big trade and wouldn't be scared of it. I think if you're moving on from Nemec, you're going to get a decent back in a trade. The one that we were talking about at work the other day was, would they be in on JT Miller?
I think
That'd
they
be
are in
interesting to
on
see.
JT Miller, but I just don't know if Nemec is a guy that they're willing to put in that trade yet. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Because I think that if they were, this deal might be closer to getting done. Don't you?
I would think so. I would think so. The only thing for Vancouver though is like, do they more want to play like players that are ready to play now, so they're not sort of tanking their season because like they are and they should be a playoff team, right? So it's like Nemec, you're not necessarily making your team better. But who do you have as the number one sort of trade bait for them?
He was a guy I thought about a lot, um, but I ended up going with Dawson Mercer. I just don't really think it's panned out for him the past couple years, and I think that um, New Jersey might want to look at a little bit more scoring. And I think if they do that, like he could be a pretty valuable piece to getting a guy back. Like he had 30 goals a couple years ago, 20 last year. He's still a really solid player. I just don't know if he fits into their long-term plans, though, to be quite honest with you. I don't know if his ceiling is as high as I kind of originally thought either. But I mean, if they do go after a JT Miller or something like that, I think Vancouver would be really interested in a guy like that.
Yeah, Dawson Miller is definitely an interesting one because if they are going after like a bigger name, Dawson Mercer would probably be a player that a lot of teams would be interested in getting in return, and some type of trade for a big name player. It's really hard though because like I don't even know what big name players are going to get traded because the only one really that feels like they are going to get traded so far this year is JT Miller, right?
You never know, man. Like Hurdle last year came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Let's move on to the final two teams here in the Eastern Conference. We got the Toronto Maple Leafs. I went with Nick Robertson here, Mark. 23 years old. He's got 1 year left at 800K basically. He's an RFA at this end of the season. We all know about sort of him wanting out of Toronto last year. Still not really panning out for him in Toronto anymore. I think this is a guy that's going to get traded. I think you Toronto is probably going to want to move on from him before his value becomes any less, to be honest. And I think he's also a guy that needs a change of scenery. Who do you have for them though?
I also went with Nick Robertson. I think he's a guy that's definitely expendable. I think that the Leafs might look to upgrade their bottom six a little bit, bring in probably like a third line center, maybe even a guy that can play on their fourth line as well. I just don't really see a spot for him in the playoffs if that happens. So I think honestly, it'd probably be better to kind of move on from him, throw him in one of these trades as a piece.
And just before we move on from Toronto, we were like a while ago we talked about Brock Nelson, right? There's been a lot of rumors that Brock Nelson would fit in really good in Toronto. When we sort of were talking about the return for Brock Nelson, what they may be looking for on the island, it was like maybe a prospect, a player that can play in the NHL right now. If you're Toronto and the Islanders, what do you think about this deal? Fraser Minton, Nick Robertson, and like a second or third round pick for Brock Nelson, 50% retained, so at $3 million.
If I'm the
What do you
Islanders,
think
I
about
say
that?
no.
You say no to that, eh?
A third round pick is not enough.
Well, what if it was a second round pick, Fraser Minton and Robertson?
I'd probably consider it, but also considering I'm retaining half, I might honestly be looking at a bit more.
Even had a bit more.
Yeah,
Okay, interesting. Because
because I would say Minton is like a B minus to C plus prospect. What is Robertson right now? Like I know he's not really a
like
prospect anymore, but like I'd say his ceiling at this point is probably a top nine forward. Like I don't
yeah,
see him being
like a
a top
third
six
line
forward.
scoring type of player, 20 goal year guy.
I just think when you're getting a third in there, it's like there's really no value in that deal for the Islanders at all. Like I feel like I'd almost prefer to keep him than
Yeah,
get that.
I just want to get your take on it because I have heard a lot of like Fraser Minton and what kind of picks or Fraser Minton, what kind of deal would you need to do for Brock Nelson?
You
I
also got
wanted
to
to see what
consider that either
you were
that
thinking.
second or third is like a late second or third, especially if the Leafs win their
Yeah,
division.
that's that's fair. Honestly, if I was the New York Islanders, I wouldn't blame them for asking for more. Brock Nelson's he's a hell of a player, man. He's a hell of a player, and he's going to make a hell of an impact on a team going on a playoff run. Last up in the Eastern Conference, we got the Washington Capitals. Mark, who do you have for them?
You're gonna be shocked at who I put here. I put Andrew Mangiapane. The reason why I did this is I don't think he's having the greatest year. He's been on their fourth line for a little bit. And I think Washington has the opportunity to make an impact this year and go out and get kind of a guy that can produce a little bit more than Andrew Mangiapane. And I think that his cap hit's pretty large, but it's also the last year of the deal. And I think if you could
Yeah,
offload almost $6 million, there's ample opportunity to bring in someone else. Like you'd be looking at upgrading Mangiapane to Ricard Raquel, dude. You know what I
yeah, that
mean?
would
Like
be
if
a
you're Washington, why don't you give it a shot if it doesn't take too much? Like, you know what I mean? I just think that if I'm not convinced Washington's really going to do a lot. I think they're pretty content with their team, but I think if they do want to do some sort of upgrade, I think that he's a guy you could look to send out because he makes a lot of money, but it's also the rest of this year, dude. So I don't think that no one is going to be willing to take this on. Like, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
also,
There's
like,
gonna
we're
be
talking, does Ryan Leonard hop in and make an impact? Like, that's almost like a deadline acquisition, too, right? This is another team that I'm not really convinced they're going to make a move, like a trade. But I mean, if they do and they want to make a significant one, I think Mangiapane might be going out.
that's who I had as well because if they are making some sort of move, they're gonna have to clear up some cap space. And the only guy really that if I was Washington that I'd be willing to move on from that is going to clear up some cap space is Mangiapane, unless it's somebody else that's like on a longer term deal. But anybody on a longer term deal, those other teams aren't going to want to take on a cap if for a longer time, of course, right? So I think it's Mangiapane that's the most likely to get traded. I'm with you, man. I don't think this team is going to be making a whole lot of moves come trade deadline. I think they're pretty happy with what they got here. Um, I could maybe see him picking up more of a scoring player to replace Mangiapane, but I don't think they're going to be making a whole lot of moves. Like their goaltending's fine. Their defensemen, I think their defense is fine. Again, maybe you could use a depth guy for playoffs if there's injuries. Like every team that's going into playoffs and is trying to make a real run likes getting depth guys on defensemen. And then forwards, like their forwards, I think they're pretty fine too. Maybe you could use a depth guy up there, but
I was more just thinking maybe they can pick up a middle six, potentially top six scoring forward. Could
yeah,
help them out a bit more. So it takes a little bit stress off Ovi. I know Protas and McMichael have looked great, and I wouldn't be willing to move on from any of those guys. But even if it's a rental, dude, I think it's honestly worth a shot for them. Because they got some value for guys last year. Like they traded Mantha and Kuznetsov and these guys, and they got like, yeah, it's mid-round picks or whatever, but it's like they might be able to use that and go and just upgrade their roster this year.
for sure it's worth a shot, man. They have a chance right now of getting Alexander Ovechkin a second Stanley Cup. They're all in. They got to be all in. There's no question marks about it. Like they're going all in. You have a chance to get a legend. His second Stanley Cup. You can't second question it whatsoever. That just wraps up the Eastern Conference right there. Let's move right into the Western Conference, starting at the bottom, and we're gonna make our way up to the top. Western Conference, a little bit different because you have a couple more teams that are completely out of it. You know they're going to be true sellers. Let's start off with the biggest seller in the NHL, the Chicago Blackhawks. Who do you have for them, Mark?
Man, there's a lot of guys that I feel like I could have put on this list. But I went with a guy who's actually not a rental, and I think that you could get some more value for him with there being an extra year on his contract. I went with Connor Murphy, right-handed shooting defenseman. I would say he's a pretty solid like number 4. I mean, if you have him at number 5, it's not a problem either. He makes $4.4 million. Chicago has shown that they're not afraid to retain, even if it's not a ridiculous contract. They shipped Jake McCabe to the Leafs. He was making $4 million. They retained too. They got that extra value
Yeah.
to get that first round pick. I think they're willing to do it again, dude. If you could get Connor Murphy for $2.2 million, and if it's something you need in accordance to like a defensive shutdown guy, I think there's going to be a ton of interest, dude, if he becomes available.
Yeah, I'm going with Taylor Hall, man. He's
Really?
making he's making 6 mil this year. If they retain 50%, a team could get him for three. I think there would be a lot of teams interested in getting Taylor Hall for $3 million for 1 year. And if I'm Taylor Hall, man, like yeah, he's been a. It's interesting for him because he's been traded a bunch of times throughout his career. But like, dude, I did not realize when we were making this list, he's 33 years old, man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like this is a guy that has a lot of time left in the league. You got to imagine if you're Taylor Hall, you'd be willing to go to a cup contending team, considering he hasn't won a cup, right? It's like if he stays with Chicago, he's odds are he's never going to have a crack at a Stanley Cup for the rest of his career, unless he plays till he's like 40 years old. But it's like, could you not see Taylor Hall getting traded by trade deadline?
Yes, but I will say, do you honestly believe that a lot of contending teams are going to have interest in him? The reason I say that is he doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. He's older now. He's on his way down.
Yeah,
Unless he's kind of like a third line left winger, which I mean, he definitely probably could be. I don't know. I mean, I
I
kind of
think
see him getting traded. I don't really see the value in him though. Like, okay,
I don't think there's a ton of
what would
value
you give up for Taylor Hall? Okay, here's one. Okay,
as a rental.
here's one. I'll give you a hypothetical. Chicago, or sorry, Ottawa ships out Anton Forsberg. Just wherever, cap dump, 2.75 million. You call Chicago, you're interested in Taylor Hall, but you can only really do it if he's 50% retained. If you're Ottawa, what are you giving up for him?
I'm Ottawa. Not not giving up a first round pick
I don't
because
even think I'd give up a second. I don't think he's worth
I'd
it.
give up I'd give up a second.
Would you?
I'd give I'd give up a second, man.
I'm thinking like 2/3 or a third and a mid-tier
No,
prospect. I just
I give
don't
up a
see the
second.
value.
I give up a second, man, because like Ottawa's second, what? It's going to be probably in the 40s, maybe the 50s, right? Like if
Probably the
you're giving up,
50s, dude.
probably yeah, probably the 50s, right? Like Taylor Hall, he's not a point per game player. He's not what he used to be, man. But he's a he's going to be an effective third line player in Ottawa. The other thing too, you got to consider, he's playing on Chicago right now, and like they have been brutal, right? Like
True, but I just believe if he was that much of a difference maker, he could make a difference on Chicago.
I, I agree. I agree with that. Like I don't I don't think he's going to be like um a line driver, but I think like look, can we compare him to David Perron? Like we said, Ottawa, like it sort of
They're
hurt them
different
that they've not
style
had
of
him at points this
players,
year.
but I
But
mean,
would you say
yeah.
they're similar caliber though? Like sort of
Yeah, yeah.
third line scoring maybe type of player. Like Perron's definitely more
But
physical,
I just don't know
has a
if
bit
I'm willing
more
to give up
grit
like
to his
like
game.
I think like okay, maybe it's just because I'm talking about Ottawa and it's like I think they could probably go and do something different, but I mean, I don't know. If Chicago's not retaining, I'm not touching that contract at all.
Oh, same,
But
same.
I mean, I just don't know how much value there is for him. I mean, he's not even on pace for 20 goals. He's on pace for like under 40 points this year, around 40 points. I don't know. Maybe I'm underselling him a little bit, but I mean, if I'm giving up a second round pick, I'm not giving up anything else. There's no
Yeah, I
chance.
think it's just a second round pick.
And I need him half
Honestly,
retained.
and if I was Chicago, I'd more probably want like a. I think I'd maybe want like more a younger prospect if I was Chicago, to be honest. But
Okay, here's
just I don't
another
know.
one. If Montreal's like legitimately in the playoffs, the deadline, like I'm not confident telling you that I'd be comfortable giving up a second round pick to bring in Taylor Hall, even for the cup,
Dude,
like just to make the playoffs. I don't think I would really want to do it.
see, I think I would, man, because it's like
Really?
the second. Because it's Taylor. Like even if you guys don't win a cup when you bring in Taylor Hall, you're giving up a second round pick. Like, what's going to be more valuable? Getting those younger players on your team, the playoff experience, bringing in Taylor Hall, like bringing in the veteran player. What's going to be more valuable, that or whoever you draft 55th overall? You
True,
know
but
what I
there's
mean?
been some
Like,
pretty good
what?
second round picks recently.
That's fair.
That's what I'm
One
more
of which is running
my
your
more
first
thing.
power play.
After the first two rounds, I know it kind of tails off even when you get to the 20s, but after you get to the 20s, I feel like from 25 to like even 50, it's like you're getting a lot of similar players. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm
Yeah.
more like that's why it's like first and second round picks. I know the value's gone down with them over the years, but I still think there is some value in them. But I don't know. Like I mean, Montreal's drafted good in the second round recently. Like maybe I'd be okay with it. I'm just more skeptical because he's played what like 10 playoff games in his career, 15. He hasn't played
Yeah.
much, dude.
He's
That's
also
why it's
played
like
on a
if it was
lot.
more of a veteran guy that's had the experience, I feel like I'd be more like willing to do it.
He's also played on a lot of pretty bad teams though throughout his career.
True.
I think you can probably make the argument he's only ever played on one actually good team, and that was for 30 games or so when he was
Right.
playing for the Boston Bruins, right?
No, he was there for a couple years.
I guess he was actually. Let's move on and talk about
Honestly,
the
sorry. Before we move on, I want to say one other guy that I really considered putting on this list who's having a good year is Ryan Donato. Like for what he is, I think as like a more of a depth piece. Um,
yeah,
Here's a hypothetical for you, dude. I see Ryan Donato and Connor Murphy being packaged and going to Tampa. That's what
similar
I
to like
see.
a similar to what they did with Lafferty and McCabe a couple years ago. Of
Yeah.
course, not necessarily the same caliber, but
Donato makes $1 million. I think Tampa could upgrade their bottom six a little bit, and then I'm talking about them upgrading the right side of their defense a little bit as well. I think that they would be in a pretty good spot if they're able to get both those guys, and you could get them both for about like 3.5 million if Chicago's willing to retain on Murphy. But there's a couple other
yeah, that's
places I see
not much
Murphy
money at
as
all.
well. I see Murphy in a couple other places as well for sure. But I mean, that's kind of one that I was like, I see Tampa making a move like that.
Let's move on and talk about the San Jose Sharks. Who do you have for them, Mark?
This one's pretty obvious for me, man. I went with Michael Granlund. I think he's having a
Yep.
great year in San Jose. The only problem with making this deal is San Jose does not have any more retention slots. So I think that if a contending team who is cap strapped, it really wants to make this deal, a third party is going to have to come in. 100%. And I see that happening. Teams are willing to do it, dude. They're willing to take on a $2 million cap hit for a 4th-round pick for the rest of the year. So he's the one guy I see going. San Jose's obviously not doing well, but I mean, he's kind of rejuvenated himself over this past year and a half or whatever it is that he's been there. So I think San Jose could get some pretty good value for Michael Granlund, especially if he comes in a half retained.
I'm all with you on that. I think Michael Granlund is the number one trade bait they have. He's having a phenomenal year so far on this team, and it is true what you were saying that like the 5 million, it's going to be like they're not going to get as much value back just because they can't retain. But if they are willing to take on another bad deal, which like based on how they've sort of been operating for the past few seasons, like we know they're willing to do that. Like if they're willing to do a Manji, like take on a Mangiapane, right? Like that kind of deal, then they're gonna have no issues with
That was not a
Brandon's
team I was thinking about, but that is very interesting. Because the only reason I was thinking that is I think Washington centers are pretty set, at least in their standpoint with Strome, Dubois. They brought in Lars Eller. They like Nick Dowd, but Granlund can also play the wing as well, right? And like Dubois also plays the wing at times too. So that's a team that I didn't really think about. Where I kind of see him going, if they're willing to do it, is Carolina. I think that Carolina could use a guy like him at 2C, to be honest with you. Like get some point producers. I think he's proven he's a top 6 forward, at least at this point in his career. So that's 2 interesting teams, dude. I didn't really think about Washington, but never know.
I'd like him on Carolina too. The thing with him is I think there's going to be a fair bit of teams that are going to be interested. And I'm like, I don't think there's going to be like a 1-2 team race. I think there's going to be probably 3-4 teams.
And you're telling me this year that Columbus isn't willing to take on a couple of retention slots with the cap space they have? Like I think they're 100%. Even fucking Utah might even too, even though they're in the playoff hunt. Like Minnesota a couple years ago when they made the playoffs, they retained part of Ryan O'Reilly's deal to the Leafs. Teams are just trying to utilize their cap space, man. So I could see it happening 100%. Granlund at 2.5 is nice.
Next up, we got the Nashville Predators. This may be the most interesting team heading into trade deadline, just based off Barry Trotz. And it quite frankly seems he doesn't really know what he's doing as a general manager in the NHL. I got Gustav Nyquist, though, as their number one trade bait. He's 35 years old. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's making just above $3 million a year. I think if Nashville was willing to retain, you could get a decent third line depth forward who can put the puck in the net for like $1.5 million. Like, I think there's going to be teams interested in that. And Nashville, it doesn't make sense for like where they're at right now. It does not make any sense for them to keep them.
Okay, I got a question for you. Are you looking at Gustav Nyquist's page right now? Or no? I don't want you to bring it up if you are.
I'm not, but
okay. How many points do you think Gustav Nyquist had last season?
Last season
with Nashville,
how many games played?
81.
81. I'm gonna say he had 45.
Not even close. 75.
He had 75 last year.
Yep.
Kind of.
And look, that's a career year. That's a career year. Like, I get it, but I think he's a little bit like of an undervalued player in his career, man. He comes in 2013, 48 points, 54, 43, 48, 40, 49, 42, 53, 75, 18 right now. It's a down year for him. I think if you put him in a good situation and he's more of a playmaker. I think if you could put him on a third line with a guy that can score, he could be a hell of addition. I really do. I think they actually might be getting like a 2nd-round pick. I'll tell you one thing right now. I'd prefer to bring in Gustav Nyquist at the deadline than Taylor Hall. That's my opinion.
With that cap hit, I'd agree with you, to be honest.
He's an underrated player. Like even you saying that you obviously are familiar with hockey and you follow this shit. Like that's an underrated season that no one talked about, dude.
Yeah.
75 points is not nothing to bat your eye at, man. You could get him even half to that fucking level, dude, to play on your third line. I honestly think a lot of teams should be calling. I really do. I'd even consider taking him in at his cap hit right now.
Oh, without a doubt, I'd probably consider taking him at the cap hit right now. But it's like if you can get him at $1.5 million, man, like oh, like
Oh, I
that's
think
a
if you get him at 1.5, I'd honestly be asking for a second and a prospect. Honestly, I think he's worth it.
if I'm Nashville, man, like fucking dude, like I'm trying to get that value for him to be honest,
And
because he's
here's one
30.
one thing about him that you can look back a couple years ago and say it worked. In 2019, he was traded from Detroit to San Jose when San Jose was still decent at the deadline, and he put up 11 points in 19 games. So I mean, he's shown that he can be moved during the season, and it doesn't really affect his play.
Yeah, I would love to see him get moved to a cup contender here and make a run. Did you also have him as your number one trade bait then, or did
Oh,
you have somebody
yes, with
else?
Nashville, I do.
You did.
There are a couple guys on their team I see being moved. Like I talked about Luke Shen and potentially even Jeremy Lazon. But I think that Nyquist being a UFA this year, and the season he had last year, I think a team sees value in bringing him in, especially as like a depth piece.
Yeah, I think without a doubt he's probably the number one for the Nashville Predators. And honestly, across the entire NHL, you might have him top five trade bait
Oh,
across the
I think
entire NHL.
probably. I'd have to go through it, but 5 to 10 for sure.
Yeah. Next up, we got the Anaheim Ducks. This is a team that again did their sellers. I went with Robbie Fabry here. 28 years old. He's got 1 year left. He's making $4 million, which is a bit much. Like if you're a
Yeah.
team that's trying to go out and get Fabry, you have to have him at least 50% retained. Like I'm not wanting Fabry for over $2.5 million. Who did you have for the Ducks though?
I thought of him. He's kind of having an underwhelming season. I actually went with Brian Dumoulin. He's making $3.1 million. He's a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups with the Penguins. I think he's a really solid shutdown defenseman. Probably not as good as he was at some points in his career with Pittsburgh, but I mean, I'd be bringing him in as like a number 4, number 5 guy. I think you can get him for 1.65 as well. I think that'd be some pretty nice business for a team to bring in as like a bottom pairing defenseman. Like I think a lot of teams might have interest in that too, dude.
And Dumoulin? Yeah, I could.
Yeah, like you're telling me like even Tampa wouldn't look at him and be like, fuck, he's won 2 cups. Could probably fit into our system nice. I mean, played with Gensel. I know that doesn't really matter, but I don't know. I look at Tampa. I look at fucking like Ottawa. Florida might be in the mix on him. Dallas.
I could for sure see some teams being interested in getting him in, playing bottom pairing minutes, being physical.
Like
And,
I think if he's your
and
number 5,
he's a
you're in a
vet.
really solid spot.
Yeah. Anaheim, they're definitely gonna be making some moves. There's a couple guys for them that I could see getting traded. Like we didn't even talk about John Gibson, but that's another
I'm
guy
not
that
gonna
like
believe it till it happens, man.
yeah, I'm sort of with you on that. It's starting to sound more like a fairy tale than the truth
I
right
think they're
now.
just overvaluing him way too much, man.
Yep. Let's move on to the Seattle Kraken. Mark, we'll start off with you for them. Who do you have?
There's a couple guys on their team I think that could potentially get traded here, but I think the one guy that's been rumored most of the season's Yanni Gord. That's a guy that I'm going with as well. I think that some teams could really bring him in and solidify that kind of 3C spot. He's got the cup pedigree with Tampa. Man, I didn't know this. I heard this a couple of days ago. So in their 2 cup runs, 32 wins in 2 runs, he had 4 game winning goals. It's pretty good.
Pretty impressive.
One of them was to send them to the Cup Finals in the shortened season against the Islanders. I think that he's probably not as good as he was before. He's kind of been dealing with some injuries this year. That's why I'm kind of iffy about what his value is on the open market. But I think with Seattle, they're not making the playoffs. If he's not really talking to you about re-signing, I think he'd walk. I think that he'd be a pretty intriguing piece for some teams to bring in. I think that he could be out the door.
Yeah, I'm with you. I went with Yanni Gordon for the Seattle Kraken. If he's not going to re-sign, there's no point in keeping him. Um he's got the 1 year left. The thing with him though is of course like the injuries so far this year, and
He's been out 3
the
different
five
times, dude.
the $5 million cap hit too, right? Like if you're a cup contender, bringing him in as a rental piece, you're going to want some retention there. You're not going to want to be taking on that full cap hit, of course. But I I think I think you could like. Do you think he's worth a first round pick? Because I don't think so. I think he's more like
No, I
a
don't. I
second
don't.
and second and like second and a B
I
minus
think even if you
prospect.
retain half, which I mean, Seattle did last year with Wenberg when they sent him to the Rangers, so they're not willing to do it. But I wouldn't give up a first round pick for him. I'd probably give up a second and like a mid tier prospect. But I mean, I
Let's
think there's
move
gonna be a
on.
lot of interest in him, dude. Like I think there's gonna be a bunch of teams that are calling.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be. Well, like you've heard the Leafs, the rumors like the Leafs may be interested. That could be a good fit.
I see Colorado interested.
I think any team that needs a centerman, like a second, third line centerman type of player, that's going to be a cup contender this year. I think all those teams are going to be interested in them. What about even like a Carolina? Like earlier, we are talking about Carolina. They sort of need a second line center. Like, would this be a guy in
I just
Carolina
don't know
you
at
think
this
would
point in
fit?
his career if he produces enough to be a second line center. That's what
Yeah,
worries me a little bit. And I also kind of was looking at Winnipeg, but I just don't really know if like he's an upgrade on even like Adam Lowry.
I don't think so. I think Adam Lowry, the intangibles that he provides is a lot more than Yanni Gord. Like, yeah, Yanni Gord's more of a scorer, but Adam Lowry, he's also your captain, man. I don't think you move on from your captain
No,
midseason
I wasn't saying
unless you're
moving
the New
on
York
from him. It was
Rangers.
more just like, is he an upgrade to where like I wouldn't want
Oh,
Lowry at 2C anymore? And I can't say that. Meanwhile, I look at Brock Nelson and I'd be like, hey, yeah, I'd put Brock Nelson at 2C over Adam Lowry.
yeah. Okay.
Adam Lowry is also one of the best third line centers, if not in the NHL, in my opinion. And it's like when you're asking him to do more than he is, I think it's just a little bit much, dude. I don't think he produces enough to be like a top six forward, but I think like Adam Lowry is like one of the best shutdown two-way centermen in the NHL, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's move on to the Utah Hockey Club. Who do you have for them?
Utah, they're an interesting situation, right? They've had a lot of injuries on the back end. They've had to acquire some guys throughout the year, and I think Marino is back. And I think that Sean Dursey's getting there soon. So I actually got them shipping out a defenseman. I went with Juuso Valimaki. I don't really think that he's going to fit on this team anymore once everyone's healthy. I think they're thrilled at what Oli Mata's been able to come in and solidify their defensive game. And I think with some of the other guys they have, does Maverick Lamoureux get another shot when he's healthy? This Michael Kesselring guy looks money, dude. He's been playing in the top four right-hand side. He's looking good. And it was more for me. It was between him, and when I and Yusuf Alamaki and Ian Cole. And I think that they'd want to keep Ian Cole more for the experience, and he's won a cup, so I went with Valimaki.
Yeah, I went with Nick Bugstad. I could see a lot of teams being interested in bringing Bugstad as like a depth centerman.
But you don't think
He's
they'd
got
want to
one.
keep him?
I think they'd be interested in keeping him, but they already have like a couple centermen right now. It's like how many are you gonna really want to keep, right? Like I think with him and Kerfoot sort of both being UFAs this year, I think they're probably gonna want to or try to move off one of those guys, and I think you're gonna get more back for Bugstad. And I think there's gonna be more interest in him, to be honest.
I just don't know
That's
if
sort of
like
what I'm thinking
Utah's
there.
move is to go out and get like a third or fourth round pick, though. Like I feel like it might be more value for them to keep him
I agree with that. I
and
think
maybe even
more if they're
extend
moving.
him because. And I say that because like he was on Arizona, got traded to Edmonton for a rent like as a rental, and then he came back.
I more think if they're moving on from Bugstad, it's like you're getting a young player that can play in the NHL. Like for the Leafs, like would you do Bugstad for Robertson? Some sort of deal around that? Because
I don't think
I'd
it's
be
worth it
interested
for
in that.
Utah.
See, if I was Utah, honestly, I'd kind of be a bit interested in that, man. You're getting
It's
a
just
you're
the
getting a
center
young,
position that is very.
yeah,
They don't have a ton of centers, like of really good centers. Like Cooley's the guy for the future. I don't really know exactly what Barrett Hayton is right now.
yeah.
And then I look, it's like Bukestad, Jack McBain. Like I don't know. Like, I mean, I'd be open to it, but I'm just not convinced if he doesn't want to resign, maybe, and you're out of it. But I'm more of the mind that I think Utah's actually going to be in the hunt. Regardless if they get in, I think they're going to be in the hunt.
See, this one's also hard for me too because at this point I don't like I'm more planning on them to be honest being out of the hunt
Okay.
come trade deadline, which is why I think more Bugstad would be on his way out the door. But if they are in the hunt, then like maybe you do
It would
try
just
to
be
keep
hard
him
to give up
or
a veteran center for like a project in Nick Robertson when you're in the hunt and like center's so valuable and you want veterans on your team. You know what I mean?
yeah, that's
I,
that's fair.
I'd be wanting a bit more if that was a possibility with Toronto, I think.
Let's talk about the St. Louis Blues. Who do you have for them, Mark?
Man, there's not really that many guys that have great value that could be moved because like their whole back end basically has a fucking no move clause. Like it's crazy. I went with the guy that's been rumored to get traded recently. I don't know how much interest there is in him. Obviously, he's Brandon Saad. $4.5 million cap hit. Not really sure if St. Louis is willing to retain on it or not. I think maybe if they do want to move on from him, they're gonna have to be open to it. But I think Brandon Saad at like maybe $3 million might be a pretty nice piece for a team to add for some depth in their lineup, get some scoring in. Like, didn't he have 25 goals last year? Like, I mean, he's still showing that he can play. I just think that teams don't really want to take him on at that cap hit, considering it's not like a rental. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that
But like,
see,
would you be
I
interested in
was
Brandon Saad at $3 million or 2.5?
not really to be honest, man.
No.
He's like if I was the Flames or if I was just like another NHL team.
Well, I think I mean, I don't know how much a competitor is going to be interested, but he does have cup experience, right? That's the thing.
Yeah, he does have cup experience. He is a veteran player, but I just don't know, man. Like if you're getting a guy that really hasn't been producing as of lately, like even 3.5, like playing on my third line seems
All right, so he
a
makes
bit
four and a
much to be
half.
honest.
So at most they could retain 2.25. So you'd be getting him for 2.25. Does that change your
Two
opinion at
point
all?
2.25 I'd be more open to. Just
I think you could
even
manage that on a third line for the rest of this season and next season.
I think if I was like if I was not a cup contender, I'd be more willing to do it. Like if I was a cup contender, I quite frankly, I don't think I'd be necessarily doing that, considering like you can get younger pieces or more producing pieces for a lot less around the league right now. But like if I was a team more in the middle that needed some veteran experience and some a bit of scoring, I'd be open to it for the right retention price. But for 4.5 for 2 years, I wouldn't do that if I was a lot of teams.
I'm not
two
convinced
point
I
two
would either.
five. I think 2.25 if you're a younger team. Okay, well let me ask you this: like Montreal 2.25, would you be willing to do that if you guys really didn't
I
have to
was
give
just
up
thinking
much?
about this. Um, I want to say no because I think we have enough of kind of veteran guys up front right now.
Yeah, I got I agree
With
with that.
Anderson and Gallagher and Armia still there. You got Dvorak. I know some of these guys are UFAs and might not come back, but I think Montreal's a bit of a different situation. I would say no, but I mean, if I can't say like okay, if Armia doesn't come back and Dvorak doesn't come back, I might be open to it. But I mean, I also don't have the answer to that right now either, right?
I also like don't know what his value is to be honest either, because it's like
Oh, I think to be honest, it's like either a late round pick or like future considerations. Really.
that's what I was kind of thinking. Like I almost view him more as you're taking on a bad contract from St. Louis, to be honest, than like
Yeah, I
you
could see
really
that.
getting than really getting an asset. For me, honestly, man, this one might be a bit surprising, but I went with Jakob Stancil. 19-year-old that was lighting up the World Juniors.
Okay.
Um, when you look at St. Louis, man, like it really does feel like they're lacking maybe some of that top end talent on forward. Like you got Robert Thomas, he's looked incredible at points. You got Jordan Kyrou, he's looked like a pretty solid top six player. I think they could use another solid solidified top six player, and if that was available in the market, I think they'd be willing to give up Jakob Stancil, considering some of the prospects they already have in the pipeline at
Yeah, I
forward, right?
think they'd
Like
definitely be willing to move on from him for sure. They got
they already have
Dvorsky,
Dvorsky,
Otto
and it's
Stenberg, like Adam Juracek, Theo Lindstein. Like they look pretty nice for the future, to be honest.
And to be honest, that Stancil kid, his stock is his draft stock is probably, or not draft stock, but trade stock is probably at its highest right now, given what he did at the World Juniors, right? So it's like it, if I'm St. Louis and I'm trying to make the playoffs and trying to get this team better, I'd be willing to make a trade for like a top six player that has some term left that isn't going to be like a rental piece or anything. Still like at a good age, right? Like I don't want to be trading for somebody that's like a Gustav Nyquist. I'm not giving up Stancil for Gustav Nyquist, right? But you can get somebody that's
Really?
like Stancil for Gustav Nyquist.
You
I
wouldn't
don't
do
know,
that?
man. No,
Wow, that's surprising. I think I'd do it
more,
for sure.
more just because for St. Louis, like they're not a. I don't think they're a true cup contender. And the other thing for that is like Nyquist is 35. He's going to be a rental piece, right? Like
Well, I feel like that's
I
more
don't.
my question than why would you do it? If you just view Nyquist as a rental piece, St. Louis isn't in the playoffs.
I think more if they're trading Stancil, then I'd be looking at getting like a guy with like 2 3 years left on his deal.
Oh, okay,
Has
okay.
like has a bit of term, maybe like has a like maybe a Joel Farabee, that type of player.
That's interesting.
Let's move on and talk about the Vancouver Canucks. Mark, this is going to be the most interesting one, and we're probably going to have the same player here. Who do you have?
Oh, I don't think we are at all. I didn't go with one of the big guys. I don't think that
Oh,
they're going to get
okay.
traded. I don't, to be honest. I
I
mean,
went.
I'm a little bit more convinced with what happened this weekend. I went with a guy that's been rumored to get traded because it hasn't worked out there as a depth piece is Vincent Desharnais.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They've been rumored to trade him. I think it's just my methodology is okay. Miller and Pedersen can get traded for sure, but I think it's a lot easier to move a guy like this, obviously. So
Oh
that's
yeah,
why I more went with Vincent Desharnais because they're going to try to upgrade their back end. No matter what happens with Pedersen and Miller, they're upgrading their back end.
yeah, and they kind of need to upgrade their back end towards the and then their lower pairings. See, I went with JT Miller, man. I'm
Are
convinced
you
JT
convinced
Miller's going to
after
get.
this weekend he's going?
I'm convinced after this weekend that he's going now. I'm all on board that they should be trading JT Miller for the last couple weeks. To be honest, like Vancouver, they're their team that should be in the playoffs this season. They're kind of just on the bubble right now, right? Like they're 1 point out right now out of a wild card spot. This is a team that should be in the fucking playoffs, man. And like you can't you can't let this JT Miller, Elias Pettersson thing sewer your entire season, dude. Like if they don't make the playoffs this year, we're gonna be sitting here being like Vancouver didn't make the playoffs because of the Elias Pettersson, JT Miller drama.
I think you got to credit injuries to a lot of it, though, too, dude.
Injuries a bit as well, but like if they just had injuries though, and like this drama wasn't going on, do you think they'd still be like? Do you think they'd be more like 55 points in a wild card spot, a bit more secure right now compared to like sitting a point out of the wild card spot with a couple teams like right behind them?
I don't know, man, because like those guys have both been out at different points this year. So like it's not like I can credit to like their plays poor because they're playing together. Like, of course they've played together at some points, but it's like Miller was out a month, Pedersen's been out. Like I don't know. I just think
See,
Quinn Hughes is saving their fucking season, dude. That's what I think.
I think he's definitely saving their season as well, but I more think it's just that overall the team is yes they have injuries, but also I think overall players on the team aren't performing fully up to their capabilities because of its such a fucking bad situation right now. Like every day these guys are going in and having to answer questions. Look at the fucking media like what's going on there with them nonstop talking about this situation. Like I think they got to trade one of these guys so the media and all these questions and all the narrative can just fucking stop and these players can come in and play hockey.
Do you not think it's a difficult move though to make during the season and like having like 3-ish months to adapt? Like, because I mean, you're going to be bringing in some significant pieces if Miller's going, right? That's my only worry. Like, the one thing I just see happening is like, okay, say they make the trade, make the playoffs, or like a first round exit, and then everyone's going to be like, well, you know what? They should have kept him for the rest of the year and dealt with it in the summer. Like, that's just what I see happening. And I mean, you probably like can't really win in either situation unless you legitimately win the Stanley Cup. But I don't know, dude. Like, I mean, I'd be open to it. I just wonder what the return is and if it's worth it right now. Like, it's just
Yeah,
I have so many questions about this situation. Like, what are you really getting
it is.
back? Like,
It is a brutal situation right now because even if they are trading JT Miller, they're not going to be getting the full return that they should be getting. If they wait till the summer, though, even like who knows what that looks like in the summer. I just don't know what the answers fully is for the Vancouver. I'm not 100% sure that they know what the answer is either, but I just think that like it's gotten bad enough how it is right now, and it's time to do something to start to make it better at least.
I don't know if we're ever obviously going to know what it's all about, but like, it's just
Oh, I
kind of
don't think
nuts
we
to
ever
me that
will.
like these two guys like actually can't like, it's not even the fact of just liking each other, dude. It's just being able to like play and like be around that guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
guys in the league definitely dislike some of their teammates. And like, it's just crazy that these two high caliber players like just can't find mutual grounds and figure it out for the better of the team.
yeah. Let's move on to the Calgary Flames. Who do you have for them?
They're in a situation like Montreal Columbus, right? Where they didn't really have the expectation of making the playoffs, but they're right there in the hunt. I went more of a minor move. I went Dan Vladar going out. I wouldn't mind bringing up Devin Cooley and giving him a shot as the backup, dude, at all. And I think
Yeah,
that even if it's a late round pick, get something for Vladar. Not really that open for them to re-sign him, to be honest. So I ended up going with Vladar.
yeah. I went with Andre Kuzmenko.
You think the
Honestly, like
value's there though, even at half retained? Because I'm not convinced.
I don't know what half retained, but it's like I don't think he's going to resign with the Flames. I don't think the Flames would want to resign him. It's like if I'm the Flames, man, I'd trade him for a fourth. Like to be honest,
And even retain half
oh, probably to be honest,
just to get something for him.
probably just to get something for him. Like
Like
he's a
two
UFA, he's
goals
going to
this
leave,
year.
man. 2 goals, 9 assists.
Ugh.
He's been pretty bad, but it's like I'd retain 50% on him and take whatever pick I can get,
So do you
whatever
not see
fucking
Vladar getting
prospect I
moved?
can get. I don't know, man. I'm not convinced he's gonna get moved, dude. Like he's been good at points this year for the Flames. Like
Yeah.
Dustin Wolf for sure is the best goalie on the Flames roster and has had the better season out of the two. But I think you gotta. I don't think you have to give some of that success that he's having. Like I don't think some of the success that Wolf is having is because of Vladar, but I think Vladar is definitely helping out and making it easier on Dustin Wolf as a rookie goalie. Because it's like, let's be real, man. Like you put Dustin Wolf in some other situations around the NHL, like maybe he's not having as good of a rookie season, right? Like I think having a reliable backup goalie in Dan Vladar is kind of helping Wolf out where he's not relied to play all these games where it's too many for him or the workload's too much.
I mean, I do agree with that, but I just can't. I can't say that I can't see Devin Cooley getting called up and like providing the same value. To be honest, like I just don't think Vladar's been that good. Where it's like it's not like what Cooley could do is not like out of the question. And it's also like you'd be
Yes.
bringing up a guy from the AHL who's basically been an AHL lifer and he's playing unreal now, and he's also going to fight for that spot, dude. He's going to
Yeah,
push Dustin Wolf. Do you see them re-signing Vladar?
I could see them re-signing Vladar.
Okay.
Because the thing is, let's say you do move on from Vladar, and then you bring up Cooley, and it doesn't go well. Then it's like, well, we gave up Vladar for this, and now Wolf is going to have to carry the load the rest of the season, and you don't want to fuck Wolf's development because he's now having to carry the load for the last quarter of the season, right?
But is that something
Especially
you're really
considering
that concerned with, though? I mean, even if Cooley plays and is bad, it's like you personally don't really want or expect them to make the playoffs anyway.
I don't want to personally, but it's like if the team wants to make the playoffs and it's like they start to ride Dustin Wolf too much towards the end of the season because they want to be in the playoffs and they're kind of in the hunt, then it's like, you know what I mean?
I guess. Yeah. I just feel like they could bring up Cooley and play him as much as they're playing Vladar right now to be fine. I guess is what I'm
I,
saying. You know.
like honestly, I could see Vladar getting traded. I just don't know if the Flames are going to be fully wanting to do that.
I just think he could be a nice depth goalie for one of these teams we're talking about that need goalie insurance,
Yeah,
like a Carolina. I could even see him going to like Utah, to be honest. Like, I don't know.
I almost wonder though too. It's like how willing the Flames would be willing to move on from Devin Cooley. It's like, would they almost rather just trade Cooley and keep Vladar if Vladar's willing to re-sign for the right price? But that's sort of a whole other discussion, right?
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about the LA Kings. This one is starting to get more interesting with them as they look like they're a lock for the playoffs. Who do you have as their highest trade bait?
I'm not really convinced they want to do much surgery to their actual roster right now. I ended up going with more of a prospect guy who got a bit of a chance this year. I went with Akil Thomas. I think they might be able to trade him in some sort of piece if they're willing to upgrade. I don't know exactly what they'd be looking for, to be quite honest with you. Some people are saying they're looking for a left-handed defenseman. I don't really know if that makes sense for them. They've already got Mikey Anderson, Gavrikov, Joel Edmondson. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Unless it's a top caliber guy, like, I don't really see how it makes a ton of sense, to be honest with you.
what
Maybe
about
they're
like a
going to look for some
Provorov?
scoring up front. But okay, but then what? Like, Provorov's what? Top pair? Like, I don't know how confident I
Yeah,
am in that. Mikey Anderson plays well with Doughty. Gavrikov's been money defensively this year. And then so what? You're either putting Gavrikov at the bottom and Provorov second pair or vice versa. And Joel Edmondson, I think he's fine if he's on the third pair. And then your right side, it's Spence, Clark, and Doughty.
yeah,
I don't see how
yeah.
a D move makes sense unless you're going after a legit top pairing left-handed defenseman.
Yeah, I don't know if Provorov is enough to do that trade, but that was just the first guy that sort of came to my mind that we know is probably going to be on the market.
See, when this guy was rumored to be traded, I thought LA would be a decent fit, was Sanheim.
Yeah,
But I don't think Philly's doing that anymore. I think they want him.
I don't think there's a chance they move on from him anymore.
I wonder if LA looks for another like decent impact forward, considering like Fiala hasn't really been great. You know?
Yeah, I could see them sort of trying to pick up somebody that is more of a middle of the lineup forward, like can play on your
Has some
second line,
scoring
can also
touch
play on your
maybe
third
too.
line though. Yeah, has some scoring touch, like because there are some players that haven't fully had the offensive production this season, like Quentin Byfield. He's been good at points, but I think he could sort of step it up a bit more on the offensive side of the puck. As you mentioned, Kevin Fiala, he maybe hasn't getting the production that they've expected from
I'm gonna be
him
honest with you, dude. I actually see them moving on from him after the season.
from Fiala.
Yeah, I do. I think because
Yeah, I
Kempe's
could.
contract's going to come up soon in the next couple of years, and they prefer to have him. And I just don't really think Fiala's really been as advertised.
The only thing that's rough with him though is he has a no move clause next season.
Does he?
He has a full no move clause next year.
Oh boy, I didn't know that. Yeah, that might be harder
But
then.
in 26, 27, it turns into a 10 team no trade list. So it would
Okay.
be better then.
But
But
maybe
then
they give
again,
him
though,
another shot
Fiala's,
next year. It's a down year, they think,
yeah,
and but I don't know.
Yeah,
I went
for
with
me,
Akil
I went with
Thomas, dude. I just think that they're going to upgrade somewhere in the middle of their lineup, and he might be a piece a team is interested in.
a similar kind of thing. Like I went with a younger player who's getting a chance in the NHL right now. I went with Alex Turcotte,
I knew you were going to say this, and I
and
disagree, dude. I'd keep him.
see, I'd keep him too, but I just think like Turcotte, you could actually get like a pretty decent top six player in return for him. To be honest, man, where it's like Akil Thomas, like if you're trading Akil Thomas, I don't know how much you're really going to be able to get back for him.
No, and I agree with that, but I mean, but I also can see them shipping out like a second or like a first, even maybe if the deal's right. But I think it's just more a player in the deal I see that's going out the door.
That's That's fair. I could see Thomas going out as well if they're shipping off some other pieces in the deal. Honestly, I just went with Turcotte more just based off the fact that he he's probably the most valuable like younger player that they have right now.
Yeah.
Where it's like they could get a pretty decent player back in return for him. That's just why I was sort of thinking Turcotte. He has been sort of coming into his own this year though. Like to me, like
That's why I
he
think they
has
might want to keep him, dude. And they signed him to, I
yeah he
think it was
has
a
looked good at
3 year
points.
deal. It was a 3 year deal at like 800K or something. So it's like, I feel like
775.
that's a value deal to have in your lineup, man, especially when you're near the
Yeah.
cap. One other guy I wonder if they do actually make a move on D is Jordan Spence. Like, I wonder if they just don't see a huge future for him there. But I mean, it's also hard to bring in right handed shooting defensemen.
Just before we move on from LA, you know how I mentioned Ivan Provorov?
They're retaining on him.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I was sort of just scrolling down on Puckpedia and I
I'm
was like,
actually
Ivan
not
Provorov,
100%
what?
sure if they're allowed to bring him in then.
Yeah. Um, I don't honestly have no clue how that would fully
Wouldn't it be
work, but
cool if they actually wanted to bring him in and they had the ability to like trade his retained salary somewhere?
that'd be pretty sick. They trade it back to Columbus.
That'd be pretty funny.
Let's move on. We got the Colorado Avalanche up next. Who do you have here?
This was probably the hardest fucking one to pick, dude. Um, I didn't really go with a lot of prospects and shit that are outside the NHL. I went with more roster players. In
Yeah.
this one, I went with Parker Kelly, like because he's kind of playing their 3C role right now, and I see them upgrading in the 3C role. And I think that if they do send a guy out, he could be a guy going the other way. But this is another team where I'm not convinced that like anyone on their roster right now is getting traded. Like I think if anything, like Kelly might be like a healthy scratch, instead. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if you look at other parts of their lineup, like their D are decent. Um, like I wouldn't really even be willing to trade one of those guys because it's like you want depth D if you want to go on a run. And it's like even guys lower in the lineup, like I'm not trading Drouin. Um, I'm not trading like Miles Wood. I know he's been hurt a lot, but it's like I feel like those guys could be impactful in the playoffs, dude.
Yeah, this one was a really hard one to do as well, man. Like I went with Callum Ritchie to be honest.
Do you not
Just
think that
because it's
he?
like
Do you not think that they think that he can step into the NHL next year though, and he'd be a value piece for them, like on an ELC?
I think they maybe think that, but it's also like next year there's some uncertainties, man, with like how things are fully going to turn out with this team. Like Miko Rannon, there's a possibility that he's not there next year. To be honest, like they got
I
some
think
money to
though, if he's
spend.
not there at this point, I think it's due to them not reaching an agreement money wise, and instead of like them actually not being able to afford him. Because the more and more that I think about this, I'm not convinced Landeskog's coming back, which gives them an extra 7 mil. So I
Yeah,
think they can afford him, but I think it's just like he's rumored to want 14, and they don't even want to go above Nathan McKinnon's number. So I think if it
it's
doesn't
12-6.
happen, I think if it doesn't happen, it's because they can't reach an agreement instead of like the cap. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for me, I just was thinking Callum Ritchie because it's like, yeah, he could come in next year, have some sort of an impact, like as a younger player on his ELC. But it's like there's for the Avalanche, there's a bit of uncertainties going forward with the team construction, where it's like this year, you have a chance of winning a cup. Like, would you rather kind of go all in when you know you have a chance for certain, or hold out when there's a bit of uncertainty. That's just why I was thinking sort of maybe unloading Callum Ritchie, getting a second line centerman because you said like Casey Middleston probably better to be playing on their third line. They could probably use like a second line centerman, right? Like I think if you're trading Callum Ritchie, you probably could get a second line center back for him. So
Absolutely, dude. I think.
that's just why I was sort of thinking along the lines of him. Next up, we have the Minnesota Wild. Again, dude, this one was so fucking hard to come up with a player. Who did you have for the Wild?
I kind of wanted to talk about this earlier when we were talking about different guys that could be traded around the league, but I actually went with one of their younger prospects who has not played a whole lot in the NHL. I went with Marat Husnudinov. I think that potentially, to be honest with you, this is what I wanted to say earlier, but I didn't want to give it away. I think a decent trade is Marat Husnudinov and a second to the Islanders for Brock Nelson. That's a kind of deal I see
Okay.
happening. Him being a second round pick, decently highly touted. I mean, he hasn't kind of figured it out in the NHL yet, but he's had some pretty good stats in the KHL as a younger player. So I could see how the Islanders could see some upside in him. He's also a guy that's NHL ready. But if I had like kind of a mock trade board, I think a second in Husnudinov for Brock Nelson is like at least a pretty good starting point.
So I had Carson Lambos.
All right.
Honestly, he's 22 right now. I don't think he fits in the future plans of Minnesota
No, not at
whatsoever
all.
anymore. I think like it's time for Minnesota to move on from him, try to get some sort of return. It's like what can you pair up with him in a deal to maybe get that Brock Nelson? To be honest, it's gonna be need to be a better pick, but I just was kind of thinking with him. I don't think like when I look at the roster, man, I don't really think there's anybody they really need to move on from or like want to move on from. Most of their players are on pretty decent deals. The guys that sort of are on a bit more questionable deals, it's like you're not trading those guys right now.
They don't really have any like terrible contracts.
I got to be honest, the Jared Spurgeon one's kind of turning into one when he's healthy, but you could put him on IR right
You
now.
think like why
So
just you just don't think he's that good of a player anymore?
I think he's still decent, but I don't think he's a $7.5 million defenseman. And he's getting paid that for 2 more years after this too. So it's like
I'd say
right
recently,
now,
no, but throughout the duration of it, I'd say yes. He's been like a top pairing shutdown guy. But I mean, I could see that. But I mean, I think
it's
it's
like
also not going to be as big of a problem next year when they have this free cap, that
yeah, like
14 million, right?
right now it's not too much of an issue. Next year it's not much of an issue. I think it's going to become an issue when you have to sign Krill in UFA.
If
Like
Juracek gets a contract.
looking at some of their other younger players, like um, Juracek is he's going to be up, right? Like he's gonna get some money probably when he's coming into RFA unless he takes some sort of bridge deal. But I think that's when it's more going to be an issue when it's you have um, Juracek, Krill will need to get paid, and Philip Gustafson's going to need to get paid as well,
So is Rossi, dude.
and Rossi. That's four young players that are like that. That's going to be a lot of money you're going to need to spend in like one off season or one or two off seasons, sort of back to back there, right? So it's like Spurgeon,
I get
you don't
that.
want
I
him coming
guess
off the Bucks around
I've
there.
always loved Jared Spurgeon, so I feel like it's just hard for me to hate on him. I mean, if he's still performing at like a top four caliber level, though, I feel like it's still okay. Like, I mean, maybe he's a million or two overpaid, but I don't think it's like that ridiculous of a contract, to be completely honest with you. And no, I don't really see them moving on from him, to be honest with you. I think he'd be hard to
I
replace. I feel like I'd be okay just giving him this little bit of an overpayment for the last couple of years. They may have even expected it anyway when they signed him to this deal. And I just think he'd be a good guy to have around as they keep getting better. And maybe he's a guy who's a Minnesota lifer and he takes a cheap discount after, and he's a third pairing guy, like making a couple $1 million or something, like I don't know. But I mean, I think that I guess I do agree. He's probably a bit overpaid, but I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like I'd have no problem giving Jared Spurgeon $5 million.
Neither would I. It's just more that he's 35. He's had some health issues in the past, like
But
two
I mean, at
seasons or
worst
so,
too, it's like,
right?
what if he's done and it's LTIR, right? Like,
Yeah. That's the one thing I'm sort of thinking is that like will he even if he's 35 now, like is he going to play another 3 seasons in the NHL
I don't
based
know.
off
But yeah, like there are other guys like I look at like Foligno's that deal's okay. Like Hartman, Zuccarello, like I don't really mind those contracts. Even Joel Eriksson Ek, I think he's kind of on a little bit of a bargain, dude, for what he provides. He's like a top six centerman, right? Making
I like him as a player.
not
He's
much
also
at
got
all,
a
right?
he's also got a no move clause.
I wouldn't honestly be looking to move him anyway. Because I think
I
even at
just
that
find it
month, I think at that money, even if he regresses like in the future, like that's a decent third line center.
yeah. I like him a lot as a player. I just find it funny that he has a no move clause. Meanwhile, Matt Boldy doesn't even have any trade protection.
That is crazy, but I wonder if that had anything to do with the extension. Like, I'll take less, but give me
Yeah,
the security, you know?
yeah. Um, one more thing I want to talk about with the Wild before we move on to them is, do you think Zeev is going to get a chance in the NHL after the NCAA season comes to an end?
I'm kind of 50-50. I don't know. I think it's really going
I
to depend on their
think,
situation at the time. And is Juracek like in the NHL when the playoffs come?
yeah,
Because to be honest with you, you know who's pretty underrated on their team, dude, that no one talks about defensively is Declan Chisholm. He's a pretty solid bottom pairing defenseman, dude. He got claimed off waivers by Winnipeg last year. He's been pretty nice. Like he's got over 10 points this year too. I don't know, man. I see it, but I mean, I just don't know if it's going to happen. Do
that's
you?
that's fair. I think it's pretty 50-50 for him. Well, let's get into our last couple teams here. Next up, we got the Dallas Stars. Who do you got?
I think Dallas, one of their needs is to upgrade the right side of their defense. Um, and I think that one guy that could be going out is Niels Lundqvist. As more of a he's more of like a bottom pairing puck mover right now, not very physical. I think a team could be interested to take a flyer on him, like if they're giving up another significant piece. To be honest, dude, this is a team that I see Connor Murphy fitting in very well. And I think like Chicago might be willing to take on Niels Lundqvist as like a project, see if he kind of works out there. But I think he's going to be out the door because they need to fix their right side of their defense. And with them giving Lyubushkin and Dumba 2-year contracts last summer, I don't think they're going to be moving any of them right now. So I think Lundqvist is a pretty obvious piece that could be going.
Yeah, I sort of went with Sam Steele here. I
Okay.
think that he hasn't had the full production that Dallas sort of wants out of him. And if they're trying to free up some cap space, like to bring in a player, this could be a player that's going out in that deal. I think he's
Yeah.
sort of
Do you think they need to
like
upgrade that part of their lineup though, their bottom six a little bit?
I think they do. Like their
Like
top
you know
six
who would
is
look money there, I think, dude? Is Scott
who?
Laughton.
Yeah, I love them there. Like their top six is pretty secure. Like of course, like there's the injury to Sagan right now, but like
He might be back for the playoffs.
he might be
And they
back
got
from the playoffs.
LTIR they can use, dude.
So it's like I think more they need to sort of secure up the bottom six. The big thing with them though is like at some point is Logan Stankoven and Maverick Bork going to pop off? Because it's like you were kind of expecting one of those two guys to have a pretty good rookie season,
See,
where
I will be
I
completely
think
honest
both
with
of
you.
those
If
guys have been a bit.
my second pick, if I had a number 2 pick in this exercise we're doing here, it was Maverick Bork. Not that I don't think he's got a good NHL future, but I think that you could get like a fucking hell of a player in a deal if you're giving him away.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with him. He's an RFA at the end of this year too. So
And he
it's
hasn't
like
really panned out so far, like at least this
no.
season.
So it's like he's not going to be making the 800K that he's making right now, right? Like I'm not saying he's going to be getting a 5 by 5 deal, but you're going to have to give him some sort of pay bump. And you also got Wyatt Johnson that you got to pay this off season as
The good
well.
thing
And
is though, is I
I
believe
think he's going to make some good money.
Jamie Ben's a UFA this year, isn't he? Like that
Yeah,
nine
he
and a
is.
half
That's
million is going to be going off. Even if he stays, it's going to be a couple million. So I mean,
yeah,
you can almost allocate the money he makes to Johnston.
Wyatt
I know he's
Johnson.
probably not getting a 9.5, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. It's almost like a little bit of a trade off. But
Yeah,
I think they're okay financially. I think Connor Murphy would look really good there, though, as a right-handed shooting defenseman to play in the top four. That can shut guys down. You know what I mean? I think he'd be pretty good.
we got three more teams left in the West. We got the Edmonton Oilers up next. I got Sam O'Reilly. Sam O'Reilly, the 18-year-old from the London Knights, is their top trade bait.
Never
I
understood
think
that
Edmonton.
pick.
Pardon me?
I never understood that pick ever. Like
Neither
I didn't get it.
neither did I, to be honest. I just think Edmonton, if they're going to be going out and adding to this team, which we know they're going to be doing, you're going to have to give up some sort of prospects, some sort of picks, and I think Sam O'Reilly is one of those players that we could see going back in a trade as a prospect to get them a player like you mentioned Provorov maybe to the Oilers would look decent, right? It's like if they're going out and getting Provorov, is Sam O'Reilly a player that would maybe go back in that kind of
Probably.
deal? It's either when you look at their top prospects right now, it's sort of him and it's Matthew Savoy. And to be honest, if I was Edmonton, I'd rather hold on to Matthew Savoy because if Savoy's going to have an NHL impact a lot sooner than Sam O'Reilly is. Like Sam O'Reilly's not going to be in the NHL for probably at least two more seasons, where Savoy could be in the NHL this year. Mark, who did you have for the Edmonton Oilers though?
That's an interesting name. I mean, I didn't consider him. I kind of considered Savoy a little bit. I think Edmonton's going to obviously make a move on defense, but I think that they might try to upgrade their bottom six as well. Not convinced he's getting traded, but I just put Kapanen. I mean, they claimed him off waivers. He makes $1 million. If they do have to make a
Yeah,
deal, that salary's going out. I mean, it is a little bit of a salary that's going out. I don't really think he kind of fits in their lineup once the playoffs comes. If Evander Kane's coming back too, so honestly, this is kind of another one where I'm not convinced the roster players getting traded, but I just went with Kasperi Kapanen.
yeah, I was looking at him as another one too. The thing with him is just I don't know if the 1 million is like enough of a money coming off the books if depending on who they're bringing in.
Fair.
Um, the one I was really kind of interested in thinking was Jeff Skinner, but then I realized he had a full no move clause, so
Same.
that's not really going to happen. Um, Edmonton though they're definitely going to be looking at. Next up, we got the Vegas Golden Knights. Mark, who did you have here?
Vegas, I mean, I don't really see them doing much damage to their original roster right now. I think they're pretty content with their goaltending. I think they really like their six defensemen they've got there too. I think that they could use a little bit of help up front, maybe on the wing. And one
Yeah,
guy that I have going out the door as like more of a prospect trade piece is Brendan Brisson. I think they were kind of hoping he could be a full-time NHLer this year, and it really hasn't worked out. I think he's only played 7 games. He's been back in Henderson, not really performing that great either. Was a first-round pick, so I think that some teams can probably see some value in bringing him in and working on him as a project. But same thing with Vegas. I don't really see them subtracting from their original roster right now. I just don't see it, dude. They already moved.
yeah,
They
I
already
don't
lost
think.
enough in the offseason that I don't think that they're like. I don't think there's anyone on their roster that they're like not really happy with. Does that make sense? Like I think they're pretty happy with a lot of these guys in the roles that they're playing, and like honestly, I think they probably exceeded expectations. Like maybe the one guy is Holtz, but I also feel like that they're not really willing to give up on him yet.
Yeah, well, the Holton's been one season. He's still 22 years old, man. Like there's still room for growth for him. I don't
And
think there's
Brisson is
anybody
still
really.
young too, but like he hasn't been an NHL player.
Yeah, for me, we went with Matthew Cataford. I just think that if Vegas is trying to make a move, they could get a decent bit back or a pretty good player back if they're giving up Matthew Cataford in a deal. And I'm with you. Like, I don't think Vegas, like looking at their roster, I don't know if there's any NHL players that they're really wanting to move on from. I think maybe you could see them try to get a third goaltender. I don't know, like
Maybe
how
they
much
did it a couple
how
years
much
ago and they got quick, right? So
I don't know how much I trust Samsonov, to be honest. Like
in
in a
case Hill goes
tandem with
down,
Aiden Hill. Because if Aiden Hill goes down, like it's Samsonov,
oh, they're fucked.
and like, do you really fucking trust that? To be honest, I don't whatsoever. So I could see him maybe trying to get like a third goalie, like a Vladar maybe, um, Cooley. Who
Forsberg.
knows? But I agree with you. I think it's more wingers that they need. Like they got a bunch of center depth. They're pretty fine with their centerman. It's more they need to make a move for a top six winger. I think. How about a Gustav
I think they'd
Nyquist?
look money. I think Nyquist would be a decent ad. I think
Yeah,
they'd look pretty money if they could add a top six forward. Like Olofsson's been good, but he hasn't been super healthy. Like Brett Howden's playing pretty solid too. Like I like Kolasar a lot. Those extensions they gave recently with Kolasar and Howden are looking pretty good for them for the
yeah.
future.
Two
Yeah,
and a half
I
million.
don't.
Fuck.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see them doing some huge damage to their roster. I think they're pretty happy with what they got, but I think a scoring winger would definitely help them. Considering they lost Marcia so too, right?
And last up, we got the Winnipeg Jets, the best team in the Western Conference. Mark, I went with Colby Barlow here. They drafted him a few years ago now. He's still on his ELC, hasn't cracked the NHL yet. I think similar with Cataford, like if you're trading Colby Barlow, they're going to get a pretty decent player back in return for him. And the other thing too is the Winnipeg Jets already have some good prospects on forward, right? Like they just got Brandon Yager. They got Brad Lampard, who like might be in the NHL pretty soon. So I think Colby Barlow might be sort of the odd man out of their forward prospects. And I think if Winnipeg's trading him, they could get a decent asset in return. Who do you have for the Jets?
That's a pretty good name. I actually also went with a prospect on this one as well. I went with Chaz Lucius. He was a first rounder as well a couple years ago. I
Yeah,
think 1 year before Barlow, maybe. I'm a little bit questioning his NHL upside in the future and whether he can even get to become a top six player at this point. Like you said, they've got some pretty good prospects in the system. One other guy too you didn't mention who's pretty good is Nikita Chibrikov. He was a mid-round pick for them a couple years ago. He's looking pretty nice. Played some NHL games this year, so I could see them moving off of Chaz Lucius, to be honest, to upgrade maybe at that second line center position. If there was an NHL player that I think they would move on from, is Rasmus Kupari. He's just not it, dude. He has not figured it out the NHL level whatsoever. So I think Lucius is definitely more likely to go though.
yeah. I think this is a team that is going to be trying to get that second line center, and some of their prospects that they have are some good prospects that might be able to get the deal done. Overall, though, that pretty much wraps up every team we've talked about. We've talked about full 32 teams here. We've given about like 60, 55-ish players that we think may be getting traded. It was a lot of players. Um, Mark, I had a hell of a time doing this podcast today, man. It was
It was
a
really
lot of
fun, man. I
players,
was kind of
a lot to
curious to see
talk
what
today.
we had. We didn't really have that many similar ones. Like there
No,
were some, but I thought we were going to end up with a lot more similar players. I think after the deadline, I don't know if we'll spend a whole episode or at least part of one just kind of going over our lists and seeing how many guys from each of our lists actually got traded before the deadline this year. I'd actually be curious to kind of figure that out and see. But man, it was a lot of fun doing this. Like I even just making the list, dude. It was a bit hard at times to kind of figure out like, okay, who the fuck could this team really actually move on from like during the season, you know?
yeah, but yeah, I think we had like maybe one or two players that were the same. I know the one we had was Trent Frederick, which was the same. Honestly, I think that might have
Nick
been the only one.
Robertson, we had the
Nick
same.
Robertson. I think that might
Was
it
it
might have been like
Yanni
two or
Gord?
three, but yep,
Yanni
Yanni Gord we had. Yeah, so it was literally like three, maybe four, but it was a lot of
too,
talk
but yeah.
today. It was a good episode. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned for that. And for everybody listening this week, thanks for tuning in.